What up, ladies and clams? I'm not used to live screaming, but some things are just so important that we need a signal boost. We need to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And I'm going to be the guy that's going to be fucking annoying and obnoxious to let you know what's going on. But no, yeah, seriously. I don't know if any of you are aware, but a huge fucking court case, some dumb bullshit came out about Vince McMahon. We've all known that he's a questionable individual. We've all known that he's done some questionable things, but never a lot of the shit that I was seeing. I was like, holy fuck! I gotta get into this. I gotta look at it. I gotta read it. I gotta see what the fuck is going on. So that's what we're doing. I'm gonna try to keep it kind of pretty straight to the point. I'm just going to switch over to this, and here we go. Okay, so in the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut, which we all know that that's where like WWE headquarters is located. If you're in the know, this is Janel Grant, who is the plaintiff, and she is, and this is versus World Wrestling Entertainment Inc., Vincent K. McMahon and John Laurinaitis, which is like the head of talent, or at least at one point in time was the head of talent in the WWE. John Laurinaitis is like it's just one of those names that you know when you're aware of WWE dumb bullshit. Plaintiff Janel Grant is a former employee of WWE who is the victim of physical and emotional abuse, sexual assault, and trafficking at WWE. Ms. Grant is filing this lawsuit not just to address her own suffering, but also to act for those who are afraid to speak out. WWE's billionaire founder and executive chairman, defendant Vincent K. McMahon, lived in a penthouse duplex in Ms. Grant's apartment building. The two met in March 2019 when Ms. Grant was dealing with profound grief and struggling financially after devoting years to around-the-clock caregiving. Her parents passed away. On top of that, she was unemployed and her family home was lost in her parents' bankruptcy. After her family passed away, Ms. Grant dedicated herself to finding gainful employment. Neighbors in her building provided career advice and sought her assistance with personal events. Ms. Grant used these non-paying roles and volunteer work in community initiatives to build her resume. The building's resident manager wanted to help. She messaged McMahon to ask whether he would talk to her, sharing that Ms. Grant had been through hardship and would do great things if given a fresh start. McMahon enthusiastically responded, "Hell yes." McMahon befriended Ms. Grant, giving her hopes of a new life with promises of a yet-to-be role at WWE, and showering her with attention and assurances along with gifts like a VIP experience at WrestleMania. But what seemed like a dream in the spring of 2019 quickly became a nightmare. I think first and foremost, I think what's very interesting about all of this is just how it's portrayed as a horror story. Like, I feel like we're reading a story right now. It's kind of how it feels. But generally, a lot of this is just kind of designed to build sympathy, which I think is very interesting. And it's, it is what it is. But right, we're all learning together, right? We're kind of diving into this. The buildings, hold on, McMahon dangled career-making and life-changing promises in front of Miss Grant, he demonstrated an increasing lack of boundaries. During several meetings that were ostensibly about a potential job at WWE, he greeted her in his underwear, touched her repeatedly, asked for hugs, and spent hours sharing intimate personal details about his life. Oops, sorry about that. Oopsie. Daddy made it stinky. McMahon warned Miss Grant to keep their closeness secret, lest rumors lead to public trouble, and added that while he protects loyal people, he had world-class legal resources on speed dial to deal with people who became a problem. There was a major lawsuit. I don't remember. It was like back in the 90s because it was around the time that there was a lot of attention at WWE in the Hulkamania era. Oh, yeah, brother. There was a lot of attention on WWE because of juicing, right? There was a lot of speculation. And then it was proven that the guidelines and restrictions on steroid use was very lax within WWE. And right around the same time, because what you see is kind of controversy begets controversy, what you see is that there was also around the time there was just women that had accused him of rape, and there was hush money involved and things of that nature. So not to say that it's kind of on both ends of the spectrum, but that's absolutely how it feels, is that it's both ends of the spectrum. because not both ends of the spectrum, but ultimately this shit it just fucking happens all the goddamn time. Like, I mean, there's almost like no, with this man, he's like clearly he's been able to get away with it so long that he has methods in place to ensure that he can continue to keep things going wrong. Allegedly. There was, and this is what I think is so crazy, is that it was just a couple of years ago that Vince McMahon had to step down because it had, when they took a look at the books, it was like there's millions of dollars that was being allotted from WWE for basically hush money, right? There was all of this shit that was in this betting that was just like, where's all of this millions of dollars going? And when the board had done an investigation, it basically had turned out that he was sending a bunch of money to women to keep them quiet. And then this whole like UFC and WWE thing just kind of them merging kind of like was dirt in the eyes, I think, for a lot of this. And ultimately he ended up, he comes back on the board and like suddenly everybody's like totally okay with him. He gets a fresh new cut and a fresh new do. I don't know if you saw the fucking ridiculous goddamn mustache and shit, but it's just so insane to me that it's become a problem. And this is like this is the most that the general public has really been able to kind of dive into this kind of stuff. And it's very exciting, right? And that's why this is kind of such a big fucking deal. As such, when McMahon pushed Miss Grant for a physical relationship in return for long-promised employment at WWE, she felt trapped in an impossible situation, submitting to McMahon's sexual demands or facing ruin. Miss Grant feared she had everything to lose and faced negative consequences no matter what happened. Here's the thing. I know that some of the things that are going on Twitter, what they're talking about, and it's really just fucking nobodies that are talking about it, but it's kind of like, well, if she would accept these gifts, then obviously it wasn't that bad. But so what they're trying to do is they really need to build up the beginning of the case so that when all of that stuff comes around, you're like, well, she had no choice. What else was she gonna do? She was financially, she was scared out of her life. She couldn't pay rent. You know, she had nowhere else to go. Her parents are dead, so she has no guidance there. So what can she do? What is she gonna do, right? And it turns out, and not that it turns out, but it comes out that she's going to, accept these gifts and follow what McMahon wants in. Just to avoid any complications like in the future. It's just kind of whatever, that's what they're trying to kind of negate, is they're trying to kind of excuse kind of whatever behavior existed before. And it's totally fine. It's fine, whatever. After succumbing to the pressure for a physical relationship, and need I remind you that Vince McMahon is married. Not that this really matters because people have free will to do whatever the hell they want, but Vince McMahon is a married man who is engaging in this just awful behavior. Just awful behavior. We haven't really gotten into the actual awful behavior yet, but it makes me question a lot about just everything, and maybe this will kind of shine light. After succumbing to the pressure for a physical relationship, Miss Grant was slotted into an entry-level position as an administrator coordinator, a position McMahon created for her in WWE's legal department. Miss Grant began to work in that role in June 17th of 2019. Miss Grant remained in that role with the exception of a temporary relocation to XFL, which is the Extreme Football League, until McMahon verbally directed her to transfer to the Talent Relations Department, reporting to defendant John Laurinaitis on March 9th, 2021. So she was in that position for quite a while. During a conversation the same day, McMahon explained that her presence in the legal department was effectively delaying efforts to hire a new general counsel for the company. McMahon and Laurinaitis informed Miss Grant that she would be promoted to Vice President of Operations in the Talent Relations Department, providing her with an organizational chart reflecting this decision. Shortly thereafter, they informed her that they needed her to begin at a lower level as a director, but promised her promotion to Vice President after a 12-month period. Despite Miss Grant's expressions of unhappiness and attempts to end the sexual relationship, And while she came to understand that McMahon expected the physical relationship to continue as part of her employment, she had no idea how sordid it would become, nor how the psychological torture and physical violence would leave her feeling helpless, isolated, and trapped. In March of 2020, McMahon began sharing sexually explicit photographs and videos of Miss Grant, including pornographic content he recorded with other men both inside and outside of the company, including with members of the television production tech team, executives, producers, and a world-famous athlete and former UFC heavyweight champion with whom WWE was actively trying to sign to a new contract and ultimately did sign that contract. Well, I wonder who came from the UFC and WWE was trying to get to sign a contract. I mean, that's so clearly. I mean, these are the options that you have: Matt Riddle and Brock Lesnar. I don't think Matt Riddle was a heavyweight champion, so it's like very heavily emphasizing that, like, it's like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This is Brock Lesnar. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Given McMahon's omnipotent position at WWE, coercion was inherent in his increasingly depraved sexual demands. Specifically, while McMahon was CEO of WWE and Miss Grant was employed as an entry-level coordinator in the legal department, McMahon recruited individuals to have sexual relations with Miss Grant and or with the two of them, directed Miss Grant to visit defendant Laurinaitis prior to the start of workdays for sexual encounters, and expected and directed Miss Grant to engage in sexual activity at the WWE headquarters even during working hours. Which is fucking nuts. This is literally insane, because this is alleging is that there's like a fucking ass ton of people are involving themselves with this woman, and it's like you need to fire everybody, and it's like how many people were aware of this? Like it is mind-boggling. All this time, McMahon ordered Miss Grant to keep their relationship secret unless otherwise instructed, including lying to maintain whatever cover stories he fabricated. McMahon's assurances that Miss Grant was safe and independent rang hollow in light of his efforts to isolate her from friends and attempts to chip away at her identity until it was replaced with his desired role for her as his bitch, his fantasy, and or his porn star, while occasionally intermixing softer descriptors like girlfriend and baby, even love when convenient. He exercised complete ownership and control over both her personal and professional lives. McMahon also subjected Miss Grant to acts of extreme cruelty and degradation that caused Miss Grant to disassociate and or become numb to reality in order to survive the horrific encounters. As one example of McMahon's extreme depravity, on May 9th, 2020, he defecated on Miss Grant during a threesome and then commanded her to continue pleasuring his friend with feces in her hair and running down her back, while McMahon went to the bathroom to shower off. Upon his return from the bathroom, McMahon and his friend actively resumed the threesome, which lasted over an hour and a half, while Miss Grant remained covered in McMahon's filth. When McMahon's friend left, McMahon ordered her to stay and continue to sexually gratify him. Vince McMahon is like 70-something years old. I think he's pushing like 80. Hours? I mean, that's it. Fucking what? It's. I don't even know, to be honest. I don't even fucking know how to react. In June 2021, McMahon and defendant Laurinaitis sexually assaulted Miss Grant inside Laurinaitis' office in WWE headquarters while colleagues were busy at their desks. Behind a locked door, the two men cornered her and pulled her in between them, forcibly touched her before ultimately putting her on top of a table in between them. She begged them to stop, but they forced themselves on her, each taking turns restraining her for the other while saying no means yes and take it, bitch. Unsurprisingly, others at WWE knew what was going on, but instead of intervening to protect Ms. Grant, WWE actively sought to conceal the wrongdoings. In January 2022, McMahon told Ms. Grant that his wife had found out about their relationship. What? What? Purportedly to avoid divorce, negative publicity, and other repercussions, McMahon said that Ms. Grant's time at WWE was at an end, but that he wanted her to sign an NDA to ensure her silence on, among other things, his personal misconduct. That's fucking insane. They'll be like, dude, I'm totally gonna fucking sexually assault you to the like upteenth degree, and then I'm gonna make you sign an NDA so that you can't talk about it. In the days ahead, McMahon put Miss Grant under immense pressure to sign, saying that refusing would not only jeopardize McMahon, his family, and the company, but that she'd surely become a public headline, suffer reputational ruin, including from the pornographic content McMahon had captured, and face McMahon's legal resources. Conversely, McMahon reassured her that her signature would ensure his continued support and protection and safeguard her reputation. Ultimately, Ms. Grant succumbed to the pressure and signed the NDA in exchange for payments, which McMahon later stopped making. Even after pushing Ms. Grant out of the company and muzzling her with an NDA, McMahon continued efforts to exploit her, including attempting to traffic her to a WW star who would be in New York City for a live event and TV taping in March 2022. Understandably, defendant's predatory conduct has left Ms. Grant crippled, both physically and mentally, including from debilitating symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and suicidal ideation. These symptoms led to her termination from her subsequent job running her building's operations due to her inability to leave her home for weeks at a time. Despite McMahon's promise of reputational protection, WWE appears to have leaked information that led to the public disclosure of her name by a media blogger who cited a source in #WWE with direct knowledge of the situation, which upon information and belief was an overt intimidation tactic aimed at Ms. Grant. WWE has also attempted to sweep the matter under the rug, following media reports that McMahon was involved in a hush money payment scandal. WWE released a statement in June 2022 to announce that a special committee of its board of directors was investigating the alleged misconduct and appointing Stephanie McMahon as interim CEO and interim chairwoman. Like I had mentioned, like I said, it was fairly recently. In this capacity, Ms. McMahon publicly affirmed her commitment to doing everything in her power to help the special committee complete its work and to implement its findings. She also declared the importance of a safe and collaborative workplace. Notwithstanding this public statement, the investigation was a sham. In November 2022, WWE touted the conclusion of the special committee investigation into the misconduct, yet the special committee never even bothered to interview Ms. Grant or request any documents despite Ms. Grant stating that she would cooperate. In SEC filings, the company tried to divert attention away from McMahon's abuse of women by focusing on the technical issue of how hush money was accounted for. In the words of the company, the issue was immaterial accounting errors related to certain payments that Mr. McMahon agreed to make during the period from 2006 through 2022, emphasis added. Through all this trauma, Ms. Grant has endured profound suffering in silence, feeling of exploitation, loss of security, and the fear of facing the wrath of WWE and McMahon's army of attorneys, if she were to come forward and bring to light the egregious acts detailed herein. That time has passed, and Ms. Grant seeks to hold defendants accountable for their reprehensible and unlawful acts for her own sake and for others. Ms. Grant seeks a declaratory judgment that her NDA is invalid under federal and state laws and asserts claims other laws, including the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Parties. Plaintiff Janel Grant, a Connecticut citizen, is a former employee of WWE, having worked there from June 2019 through March of 2022. Defendant Vincent K. McMahon is a Connecticut citizen, co-founded WWE in 1980, and served on the board of directors of WWE from 1980 to September 2023. He is currently the executive chairman of the board for TKO Group Holdings, LLC. Defendant World Wrestling Entertainment, Inc., NKA, World Wrestling Entertainment, LLC, is a Delaware limited liability company whose sole managing member is TKO Group Holdings, a Delaware corporation until on or about September 12, 2023. WWE was a Delaware corporation with the headquarters in Connecticut. On September 12th, a transaction completed between the Endeavor Group Holdings and World Wrestling Inc., resulting in a merger between the WWE and Ultimate Fighting Championship promotions and the formation of their new parent company, TKO. Defendant John Laurinaitis, an Arizona citizen, is the former head of talent relations and general manager at WWE, who on information and belief was officially dismissed by WWE in August of 2022, amid allegations of misconduct by women in WWE. At all times, relevant WWE corporate officer number 2 was high-ranking employee at WWE who made hiring decisions, conducted prospective employee interviews, and maintained significant control over personnel decisions. WWE corporate officer number 2 worked in these capacities during Ms. Grant's employment with WWE. This individual is referred to herein as WWE corporate officer number 2. At all times relevant, corporate officer number 1 was a high-ranking employee and board member at WWE during Ms. Grant's employment with WWE. Corporate officer number 1 continued to work in high-ranking positions in connection with the September 12, 2023 merger. This individual is referred to herein as WWE corporate officer number 1. Corporate officer number 3 was a high-ranking. This individual referred to blah, blah, blah. Corporate officer number 4, Superstar, is a professional wrestler who performed W brand during the time McMahon signed WWE booking a new contract. This individual is herein referred to as WWE Superstar. This court has jurisdiction over this action pursuant to the 28 U.S.C. 1331 because Ms. Grant's claims under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and her cause of action for declaratory relief under the Speak Out Act all raise a federal question. This court has also supplemented jurisdiction over Ms. Grant's state law claims pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1367. The claims are so related to the TVPA claims as to form part of the same case or controversy. Venue is proper in this district pursuant to 28 U.S.C. as a substantial part of the events or omissions giving rise to the claims occurred in the District of Connecticut. Factual allegations. Ms. Grant's history with McMahon, Laurinaitis, and WWE. Ms. Grant's introduction to McMahon turns into a 2-hour meeting between a potential entry-level employee and a billionaire CEO. Prior to having any involvement with WWE, Ms. Grant was dealing with profound grief following the loss of her parents, whom she cared for full-time as their sole caretaker. After her family passed away, Ms. Grant dedicated herself to finding gainful employment. During this time, often ran into McMahon's 2 personal assistants in her building, one of whom was a former grade school classmate of Ms. Grant. Ms. Grant's closest friend in the building was the resident manager. That individual is referred to herein as resident manager. Similar in the personality, Ms. Grant and resident manager bonded over stories of adversity as they coordinated community initiatives in the building together. Resident manager was aware of Ms. Grant's efforts to obtain employment. In March 2019, Ms. Grant remained unsuccessful in securing long-term employment. Resident manager offered to help Ms. Grant, suggesting she could reach out to defendant McMahon in case he could assist, and texted him to see if he would be willing to speak with Ms. Grant to provide advice about employment. McMahon responded enthusiastically and proposed times to meet with Ms. Grant to discuss employment. Resident manager passed along Ms. Grant's resume to McMahon ahead of the prospective meeting. Ahead of the meeting, resident manager advised Ms. Grant to be energetic, as McMahon is big on energy, and talk to McMahon no differently than she talks to the resident manager. On or about March 23, 2019, Ms. Grant arrived for the meeting at McMahon's condo with an additional printed copy of her resume, a black notepad, and thank you cookies. Sitting at his dining table, McMahon looked at Ms. Grant's resume and complimented both her communication skills and common sense before discussing little but their personal lives. For example, Ms. Grant told McMahon about the hardship that led to the resident manager's offer to help and describing losing her parents, her family's bankruptcy, and other trauma that led her to seek financial independence to ensure she would never experience losing her home again. McMahon shared stories about his upbringing, his traumatic childhood, growing up in poverty, and his current family dynamics, including his separation from Libby McMahon, described as his ex and long gone. He added his marital status is an arrangement on paper for business purposes and that he lives a quiet, isolated existence outside of the WWE. That's very, very fascinating. At the end of the meeting, McMahon told Miss Grant that he didn't just want to give her a job, but give her a life, and that he would find a place for her at WWE. Stunned, Miss Grant said that she didn't know how to thank him for possibly just changing my life. McMahon responded that one simple thank you is enough and that he'd accept a hug. They stood and embraced. McMahon then told Miss Grant that he'd get the ball rolling on the next steps, but it was a busy time of year as WWE prepared for WrestleMania, explaining that it was WWE's Super Bowl. He then invited Ms. Grant to attend as his guest along with resident manager and added that he would personally select their seats to have the best possible experience. McMahon advised her that his office would reach out to her to set up a meeting with a trusted official, which is WWE Corporate Officer number 2, at the WWE headquarters, after asking if her cell was the best number to reach her. McMahon shared his personal phone number with Ms. Grant, walked her to his door, and again hugged her while whispering, "So good." McMahon arranges for Ms. Grant to be hired by WWE while beginning to groom her for sexual exploitation. On the 31st of March, 2019, the day before Ms. Grant was scheduled to meet with WWE, Corporate Officer number 2, McMahon unexpectedly invited Ms. Grant to come back to his condo for pointers for her meeting with the Corporate Officer number 2. When she arrived, McMahon gave a huge embrace and suggested they sit on the couch. It quickly became clear that McMahon had no intention of giving her pointers for an interview, except for a single direction. If the topic comes up during her meeting, Ms. Grant could state they met through a mutual friend. During this meeting, McMahon described a surgery he had on his knee by touching Ms. Grant's leg and drawing a line where the surgery had taken place with his finger. He stated that similar to rehabbing an injury, Ms. Grant cannot let scar tissue build up inside her from trauma, as her vulnerability is a gift. McMahon explained that people are intimidated around him and are afraid to touch him. McMahon added that he is an affectionate person who likes to hug and starves for physical affection. McMahon then led Miss Grant on a tour of his condo before hugging her goodbye again, whispering, "Feels so good." It's like this man's been like trapped in this condo for who fucking knows how long, and he's like, "Finally, somebody to give me attention. I've been looking for this for my entire life. I've just been needing this." On April 1st, 2019, Ms. Grant met with the WWE Corporate Officer number 2 at WWE headquarters for a short time. WWE Corporate Officer number 2 hardly asked any questions, saying that the Corporate Officer number 2 was figuring out where Ms. Grant would be placed and then promised to be in touch again after WrestleMania. Later that day, Ms. Grant texted McMahon and enthusiastically described her meeting with the WWE Corporate Officer number 2. She also commented on a dinosaur skull that she saw on McMahon's office wall, prompting his response, "By the way, if you're a bad girl, the T-Rex will eat you," followed by, "Seriously, Janel, wherever you land in WWE, you will be a credit to the organization." On April 7th, 2019, Ms. Grant and resident manager were provided a VIP experience at WrestleMania, including private transportation in a black SUV arranged by McMahon. Per McMahon's instructions, Ms. Grant diligently took notes about her impressions from WrestleMania, her first time attending such an event. Ms. Grant left overwhelmed with emotion and feeling hopeful that everything McMahon promised was becoming a reality. For each meeting with McMahon, Ms. Grant brought sample job descriptions she found online to review with him and demonstrate the types of roles she might fit in. McMahon listened to Ms. Grant, asked her questions, and pointed out qualities that he described as rare gifts, including her goodness, vivaciousness, childlike innocence, and ability to be vulnerable, all things that made her an easy target. McMahon also initiated a long physical embrace with Ms. Grant, repeatedly telling her that he trusted her, that he could be himself around her, and how he'd opened his home to her. During one visit to the condo in late April 2019, McMahon did not greet Ms. Grant when she entered, but instead called her to his master walk-in closet. As soon as she turned the corner, McMahon emerged from his bathroom wearing only briefs. Shocked, Ms. Grant turned around and apologized, as McMahon laughed and asked her to turn around. He then handed her a shirt and asked for help with the buttons. McMahon reminded her that he was working hard on her role and said he felt good about taking care of him. Around that time, McMahon also told Ms. Grant that he would never forget how helpless she looked when they first met, that he wanted to wrap his arms around her and assured her that everything is going to be okay, and that Ms. Grant's problems were in the past. McMahon also told Ms. Grant that he viewed her as a true friend. However, McMahon advised Ms. Grant that people at WWE could never know about their closeness, or else rumors would spawn and threaten them, particularly due to Ms. Grant's physical beauty. McMahon also emphasized that the circumstances could jeopardize the company. Around this time, he mentioned that he had an attorney on speed dial whom he described as the best of the best at making problems, including people who become problems, go away. On April 21st, 2019, McMahon unexpectedly invited Ms. Grant to his condo to provide her with an update. Upon her revival, McMahon assured her that Ms. Grant he was a man of his word, and that his office would be in touch with her soon with the right role. As she turned to leave, McMahon grabbed a large black electric massager and told Ms. Grant to turn around for a demonstration. He quickly moved to rubbing his hands on Ms. Grant's upper back, before reminding her that she would hear from his office about the next steps in a day or two. 2 days later, Ms. Grant was contacted about further meetings at WWE. A week later, she met with 2 high-ranking human resource employees, referred to herein as Human Resources Employee Number 1 and Human Resources Employee Number 2, respectively. Both Human Resources Employee Number 1 and Human Resources Employee Number 2 provided Ms. Grant with their impressions about company culture at WWE and confirmed that the ball was in their court to figure out where she would be best fit in it. And god damn it, to figure out where she would best fit in at WWE. On May 5th, 2019, Ms. Grant visited McMahon's condo again, and the topic of bucket list came up, during which Ms. Grant expressed that she always dreamed of attending the Belmont Stakes. McMahon responded that he would personally acquire 2 tickets for her, which Ms. Grant said she could not accept. McMahon then stood up from his chair and knelt in front of the chair where Ms. Grant was seated, blocking her from standing. He leaned close to Ms. Grant and told her to kiss him. Ms. Grant paused and gave McMahon a kiss on the cheek, to which McMahon sighed, "That's not what I meant." After McMahon walked off to his bedroom and said that he wanted Ms. Grant, she swiftly rejected his advances and tried to reason with him that he was putting her in a bad position. Ms. Grant pled with McMahon to stop and think about what he was doing. McMahon begged repeatedly simply to hold Ms. Grant. Out of fear for her employment and his earlier implied threats about his legal team dealing with problems, Ms. Grant lay down in bed next to McMahon and kept her hands clasped and ankles crossed as she acquiesced in saying that he could only hold her, but nothing more. When Ms. Grant tried to make small talk about WWE's TV storylines, McMahon suggested that she watch the next episode of Monday Night Raw and text him before the broadcast. After she agreed, he forcibly kissed her and began pulling down a strap on her sweater. Ms. Grant then set up and said she needed to leave and a lot to process, and left. The next day, he's probably like, "Hey, so what's going on with stories in WWE?" He's like, "I don't fucking know. Like, watch Monday Night Raw, because I have no idea what's going on." The next day, Ms. Grant watched the show as promised and texted McMahon to wish him well. She was shocked when he appeared on the show and texted back in the middle of the live broadcast. "That was a very nice message," smiley faced, "made me smile." On May 29th, 2019, McMahon texted Ms. Grant that she will have a job at WWE by that Friday. The next day, Human Resources Employee Number 2 called Ms. Grant to inform her that the WWE corporate office, number 4, would contact her at 4 p.m. to discuss a legal role. After her call with WWE Corporate Office Number 4, Ms. Grant sent McMahon a thumbs up text message to indicate the call went well. Around 7 p.m., WWE Corporate Officer Number 4 unexpectedly called her a second time and formally offered her a job, saying, "Welcome to WWE." On May 11th, 2019, McMahon invited Ms. Grant to his condo again and asked her to lay in bed with him before informing her that he had ordered WWE Corporate Office Number 4 to offer her the job, even though a job description had not been firmed up beyond a high-level summary. While incredibly excited To finally receive long-awaited employment and financial security, Ms. Grant expressed to McMahon that there seemed to be a conflict between his doing this and his warning to Ms. Grant that no one could know about their closeness. He appeared amused with his replying, "It's my company." McMahon then undressed down to his briefs while Ms. Grant remained clothed, and he began kissing Ms. Grant and inserting his hands into her pants without consent. On May 16th, 2019, McMahon informed Ms. Grant that he obtained 2 tickets to the Belmont Stakes scheduled for June 8th, 2019. On May 17th, 2019, Ms. Grant received an offer letter from WWE for an entry-level job as legal administrative coordinator with a salary of $75,000. That's pretty good for, I don't know, an illegal administrative coordinator. Obviously, it's just some dumb bullshit, but I mean, making $75K a year, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. On May 18th, 2019, McMahon summoned Ms. Grant to his condo, and she brought a printed copy of the offer letter to review with him. McMahon informed Ms. Grant that her new boss, a WWE employee who worked in risk and government relations, referred to herein as WWE employee number 1, was a decades-long family friend and confidant similar in age to McMahon, and one of a small, original group, what McMahon called the Titan family, who helped the WWE expand from a regional promotion to a global juggernaut. McMahon stated that outside of his attorney, WWE employee number 1 was the most feared figure in the company because employee number 1 usually fired employees. Beyond that, he offered little detail about employee number 1's role at WWE. Instead, he focused on his personal traumas, explaining that, similar to Ms. Grant, has no family left after his spouse passed away, and that the McMahons and WWE were WWE employees number 1 surrogate family. McMahon touted that his loyalty, saying that he would be able to protect Ms. Grant, and then led her to his bedroom while giving her the command of "Please don't stop this." During the May 18th, 2019 encounter, Ms. Grant felt coerced into engaging in sexual activity, and that McMahon had trapped her in an impossible situation as she feared adverse career and personal consequences and legal retaliation if she declined his advances. Ms. Grant asked that protection be used, and McMahon responded that there was no need to worry because he was clean. Ugh. Anybody who's got to fucking be like, "Oh, don't worry, I don't have herpes." If somebody tells you, "Hey, don't fucking worry, I don't got herpes," fucking don't have sex with them. Don't even touch them with a fucking 10-foot pole. Feeling that she was being used for his gratification, Ms. Grant went numb and was unable to make eye contact. McMahon then flipped on his back and said, "Okay, check him off." Disturbed by the non-consensual sexual encounter, she hoped that McMahon would cease his advances, but his advances continued and left her to fulfill his demands or lose her job. On June 16th, 2019, the day before starting with WWE, Ms. Grant attempted to shut down any further physical contact or sexual encounters by admitting to McMahon her unhappiness and concern starting her first ever job in his legal department, no less, while in a physical relationship with the chairman and CEO. She requested that they end any physical relationship while remaining friends to avoid any risks to either of them. McMahon refused, saying that it was not ending, it did not need to, and that he did not ever envision it ending. He reminded her that he trusted her, reiterated that rumors would lead to trouble, probed whether her silence would be an issue, and brushed off her concerns that she was struggling with the feeling that her job felt unearned. Well, no fucking shit. This dude just made a fucking job for you, clearly just to kind of win your fucking sexual favors or whatever. Yes, nobody goes to a job. You don't go to Coca-Cola and say, "Hello, Mr. Coca-Cola, I would like a job." You talk to some fucking peon that's at the bottom of the stack. This is very clearly not a normal situation. Normally you say, "Oh, maybe I'll talk to Mr. McMahon who lives in the same building as me." And Mr. McMahon will then offload me onto some other person. And that other person will, get you into a job, and then you're always like, "Well, how did you get a job?" It's like, "Well, I live in the same room as Mr. McMahon," and you don't really ever interact with it. That's just not how fucking normal life works. So, clearly the job is unearned. McMahon told Miss Grant that all she needed to do was not tell anyone, and that it just has to look legit. So it's just shuffle some paperwork and make it look like you know what you're doing, is basically what he's saying. McMahon then spun the conversation and told Miss Grant to focus on the positives and embrace that her life was about to change, saying, "Isn't that what you've always wanted?" McMahon manipulatively emphasized that she's about to start an adventure and gain a new family with the WWE as a surrogate for the family that she had lost. Dude, he makes this shit sound like a fucking cult. Like, hey, this guy, his wife died, so now he's part of the family. Everybody here at WWE, we're all part of the family. Sounding a little similar to other shit. McMahon then spun the conversation. Hold on. Ultimately, Miss Grant's successful attempt to end further unwanted physical contact quickly taught her that her view on the matter was not relevant. Minimal work and an absent boss. On June 17th, 2019, Ms. Grant reported to WWE headquarters for her first day of work. With attorneys in glass offices and support staff in cubicles with low walls and tall monitors, it was easy to see how much other colleagues worked. As a quiet and small department, it was even easier to overhear their conversations. Ms. Grant was immediately surprised that there was not much work assigned to her, struggling even to appear busy in her new role. In stark contrast to colleagues who complained about overflowing inboxes, Ms. Grant's phone only overflowed with controlling and sexually charged text messages from the chairman and CEO, reminding her both of McMahon's power and ever-present surveillance. Colleagues shared onboarding stories with Ms. Grant and talked about receiving pre-made binders of information or the opportunity to shadow departing employees, none of which happened for Ms. Grant, nor did anyone know that her unusual title of administrator coordinator meant. You're like, what is that girl doing here? It's like, I don't know. She just kind of comes in and sits on her phone all day and then she leaves. And it's crazy because we're all fucking losing our minds and we're overworked, but she just gets to sit around on her phone. Ms. Grant did not even meet WWE employee number one until her second week of employment. WWE employee number one was a lively individual who frequently regaled the legal department with stories of others at WWE. If McMahon's name was mentioned, employee number one would turn to Ms. Grant with a smile, a finger point, and or a comment that drew attention to her to connection to McMahon, such as, "She knows what I'm talking about." I have no idea what you're talking about. Employee number one and Ms. Grant bonded as quickly as McMahon had predicted. Ms. Grant, referred to as partner, was taught words to live by in WWE, including, "We do what's in the best interest of the company, protect the business, and if McMahon wants something, the answer isn't no, but rather how do we make it happen?" WWE employee number one, it also impressed on Ms. Grant that job titles don't mean anything for members of McMahon's inner circle, which was clearly considered to be a part of it. As WWE employee number one was seldom in office and required little administrative support, Ms. Grant reported indirectly to another employee within the legal department, referred to herein as employee number two, who provided her with occasional projects related to talent appearances and XFL that helped fill Ms. Grant's time. Based on her hiring alone, corporate officer number 4 was on notice that there was something different about Miss Grant, namely her connection to McMahon. As Miss Grant feared and had expressed to McMahon, she was unhappy that a spotlight was unnecessarily put on her before she ever set foot in the office. Ms. Grant immediately noticed that WWE corporate office number 4 was warm with other colleagues, but cold towards her. Beginning in July 2019, after Ms. Grant raised an issue related to XFL's performance-enhancing drug policy with McMahon, WWE corporate officer number 4 behavior shifted from cold to actively hostile. If this Ms. Grant walked into a room while WWE corporate officer number 4 was laughing with colleagues, WWE corporate officer number 4's expression immediately became blank, and corporate officer number 4 would walk away. If WWE corporate officer number 4 and Ms. Grant walked towards each other in a hallway, he would stop and change directions. Colleagues noticed this shift in behavior. While some commented on it to Ms. Grant, others emulated it. Notwithstanding the issues detailed above, Ms. Grant took her employment seriously. In contrast, McMahon continued a pattern of sending sexually charged messages throughout the work week. Certain her employment depended on her continued appeasement and obedience to McMahon, and believing she needed McMahon's protection from the suspicious WWE corporate officer number 4 and others. Ms. Grant felt no choice but to respond in kind. From all this, Miss Grant began to experience debilitating panic attacks in the office on a near daily basis that left her physically drained. She could not hide the physical symptoms of these attacks and texted resident manager, "You should see the way people look at me when I'm having an attack." But while her coworkers noticed, no one dare got involved. So now we have McMahon's coercive control tactics to sexualize and dehumanize Miss Grant. In the summer of 2019, McMahon's presence was all-consuming in Miss Grant's life. In the office, she felt monitored as she was surrounded by allies of McMahon, which led to continued daily panic attacks. Outside the office, McMahon sexualized her entirely. He no longer referred to her as a friend and largely stopped talking to Miss Grant outside of sexting and fantasy talk. Any non-sexual texts related to life and or work were either ignored or given token responses like okay or yup. As detailed herein, McMahon was adamant about having Miss Grant send him explicit photographs, impressing upon her that it was part of her sexuality. Given the control that McMahon had over Miss Grant's employment, she felt compelled to comply and sent the explicit photographs to McMahon's mobile device. Miss Grant was routinely assured that the photographs she was providing to McMahon were to remain private and were part of their secret world. McMahon began to degrade Miss Grant, calling her his bitch, while hinting at a fascination while having other people watch them engage in sexual activity. Additionally, this complaint details encounters during which McMahon caused Miss Grant to sustain physical injuries, including bleeding and pain from forceful use of sex toys. Despite Miss Grant's plea to cease any further sexual activity, the number of sexual encounters increased, as did McMahon's physical aggression during them. Notably, McMahon was most aggressive when using the certain sex toys named after male WWE wrestlers and performers. McMahon named the sex toys so that the color of the toy matched the race of the wrestler. For example, a black dildo would be named after an African American wrestler, and a white dildo would be named after a Caucasian wrestler. In addition, so it's like, I got Bobby Lashley here, I got Brock Lesnar here, and I got Roman Reigns right here. Which one do you want, little girl? In addition to McMahon's infatuation with pretending that other men, and namely certain WWE talent, were in the room with them, this was yet another incremental step in desensitizing Miss Grant to his fantasy and eventual demands that she perform sexual acts for and or have sexual contact with others within WWE. During a David versus Goliath type wrestling match in 2019, Miss Grant shared, which one is that? I wonder which one that is. I'm actually very curious. Whenever it kind of refers to a specific match, shared with McMahon her thoughts. David versus Goliath. Hold on. It's got to be a pay-per-view. WWE PPV 2019. What do we got for 2019? Royal Rumble. Well, this doesn't help. Ms. Grant shared with McMahon her thoughts on the event, the draw of rooting for the underdog, and ideas for future events. McMahon complimented her creative input. She believed she was being taken seriously. That is until McMahon named a dildo after the smaller wrestler and attempted to sexualize the situation, diminishing her input. Jesus fucking Christ. It's just like, she's like, let's talk about wrestling. I don't give a shit. Let's talk about wrestling. You think it's Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns? Which one? I don't, because like Roman Reigns is a big dude. That's the only reason why I just don't see him. I mean, obviously Brock Lesnar is billed as a big fucking dude, but like when I think like me, like David versus Goliath, like personally, like it would be like something like AJ Styles versus Brock Lesnar, or I mean even like Rey Mysterio versus Omos or something like that, right? Obviously not none of these, but I don't know if I would consider, I mean, it's like anybody that you put up against Brock Lesnar, they're always going to bill it as this like David versus Goliath, but I'm just not sure. Who knows? But I'm just always curious. Anytime that they kind of refer, because there was some other one that they had referred to earlier. By the fall of 2019, McMahon frequently pressed for pornographic videos and more explicit content. When Miss Grant expressed apprehension with his request, McMahon responded with assurances that she could trust him, or questioned why she didn't trust him. McMahon also took care to remind Miss Grant of his power and influence, such as by flaunting a meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince in October of 2019. So it's got to be sometime before October of 2019. There it is. It's got to be that. It's got to be Seth Rollins versus Braun Strowman. I mean, that's That to me, that kind of comes off as that's my speculation, is that it's Seth Rollins. That he named the dildo Seth Rollins. Because, like, it's got to be prior to, but I definitely think, like, that, I mean, Braun Strowman's, I mean, he's the beast, right? He's a fucking big ass fucking dude. That's my theory, but that's just a game theory. McMahon tightens his grip on Miss Grant and discredits her doctor, replacing him with one of McMahon's choosing. In addition to her panic attacks, Ms. Grant began experiencing increasingly severe physical, mental, and emotional symptoms, including sleep disruption, dizziness, exhaustion, rashes, weight loss, hair loss, and migraines. In November 2019, Ms. Grant informed McMahon that her doctor suggested that her symptoms stemmed from trauma and ongoing stress. McMahon mocked her, "Emotional trauma, my ass." McMahon, who has basically accused his mother of like sexual abuse, basically. Well, you got trauma. My mom touched me when I was a kid. Some dumb bullshit like that. However, on November 20th, 2019, McMahon insisted that Ms. Grant see a physician of his choosing. This physician is referred to herein as Celebrity Doctor, and the facility that Celebrity Doctor operated from is referred to herein as Alternative Clinic. McMahon and Celebrity Doctor assured Grant that her bills at Alternative Clinic would be taken care of under McMahon's account. After the initial visit, it became apparent to Ms. Grant that McMahon and Celebrity Doctor wanted Ms. Grant to remain in the care of the Celebrity Doctor's practice, and Ms. Grant felt pressured to do so. Celebrity Doctor made comments about how Celebrity Doctor, they referring to McMahon and Alternative Clinic, had saved her life. And Celebrity Doctor often remarked how Ms. Grant was unable even to make eye contact with Celebrity Doctor during their initial sessions, an obvious sign of trauma. Miss Grant acknowledged having a relationship with McMahon during visits with Celebrity Doctor, who gave little reaction, save telling her there were many different paths to God and love. Celebrity Doctor lavished attention and treatments. Okay, just making sure. And products on Miss Grant, all of which were paid for under McMahon's account. Miss Grant was never provided with any receipts when Miss Grant inquired about certain treatments provided. Celebrity Doctor challenged her on whether she trusted Celebrity Doctor and postured that if she didn't trust Celebrity Doctor, then we should part ways as of right now. The outset of her care with Celebrity Doctor, each session lasted up to 1 hour. Miss Grant would leave feeling exhausted. Deep dives into her personal life as a coach, focused on behavioral sciences. On January 30th, 2020, WWE issued a press release announcing that the company's co-presidents, George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, were departing the company and would no longer serve on its board of directors. A significant drop in WWE's stock price followed. The company announced that Frank Riddick, member of the board of directors for more than 11 years, would be interim chief financial officer for McMahon. Ms. Grant advising that he would be informed by corporate office number 2 that there were a lot of rumors circulating about McMahon and Ms. Grant. Warned Ms. Grant that rumors were not good for either of them. Then, on February of 2020, without any advance warning, Ms. Grant was temporarily relocated to the XFL workforce. Ms. Grant, having been desperate to escape the feeling of being trapped in her existence at WWE, applied to remain with the XFL on March 6, 2020. She openly vocalized her desire to remain with the XFL colleagues, even referring to her state of work at WWE as nothingness, and she sought permission to make the change official from WWE employee number 1 and corporate officer number 4 before informing McMahon days after this, during which time she had finally told McMahon about her application to remain with the XFL. Her request was denied. In the weeks that followed, despite McMahon's warning about rumors and direction to Miss Grant to play dumb, he began to show explicit photos of Miss Grant to people both inside and outside of the company. On March of 2020, McMahon sent a lengthy message to Miss Grant describing in detail the circumstances surrounding sharing explicit photographs of Miss Grant to a former WWE referee, referred to herein as WWE referee. McMahon described how the referee left to masturbate and told Miss Grant she made a perfect stranger very happy. Ms. Grant initially dismissed this as mere fantasy talk, believing that McMahon would not actually do such a reckless thing. But when she voiced apprehension about McMahon sharing naked photos with her with someone she did not know, McMahon's response was not to comfort her, but to assure of WWE referee's loyalty to him. The sharing of explicit photos terrified Miss Grant, as it illustrated McMahon's sheer lack of self-control, and it further panicked her that these private and intimate photos, which included her face, were being shared with complete strangers. If there's anything that you take from this, maybe not explicitly, there's probably plenty that you can take from this, but if you ever send nudes to anybody. Just don't put your face in it, because then you can deny all plausibility. Like, that's not my penis, and you can't prove otherwise, you dick. This sharing of explicit photos terrified Miss Grant. On March 30th, the McMahon enthusiastically messaged Miss Grant that WWE referee had showed a friend a naked photo of Miss Grant, which marked the beginning of McMahon sharing Miss Grant's naked pictures with others who he encouraged to share with their friends. On March 31st, Ms. Grant expressed concern to McMahon that she had no intention of having sex with these strangers and requested McMahon make that message clear, as she felt threatened and distressed by the response of her pictures were getting. She made clear that she did not want any perception of her moving beyond the point of mere fantasy. Shortly after, McMahon surprised Ms. Grant with news that he had protected her job from furlough that WWE would imminently announce. The furlough affected a large number of employees, and McMahon emphasized that he personally made sure that she would not be one of them, reinforcing her dependency on him, particularly after a majority of the support staff in the legal department, all hired prior to Ms. Grant, were furloughed. McMahon became the most important figure in Ms. Grant's life as he meticulously asserted power and control over almost every aspect of it. Ms. Grant's fears intensified over the consequences that could result from McMahon's actions, particularly by sharing her naked pictures. She became paranoid, completely dependent on, and worshipfully devoted to McMahon. He in turn pressed forward in exerting his power over Miss Grant as he saw fit. McMahon recruits other men and forces Miss Grant into sex trafficking. Now it's about to get fucking serious, guys. Holy shit. In May 2020, the McMahon had recruited an individual whom he manipulatively referred to as his friend to engage in a threesome with McMahon and Miss Grant. The friend turned out to be McMahon's physical therapist at Alternative Clinic and is referred to herein as physical therapist. To induce Miss Grant's participation in the threesome, McMahon began referring to Miss Grant as his girlfriend and sent her a large bouquet of flowers. Nevertheless, on May 8th, 2020, Miss Grant expressed apprehension about participating in the threesome. In response, McMahon insisted that the plans were already made and suggested he would lose a friendship if she did not go through with it. On the day of the threesome, on May 9th, 2020, Ms. Grant showed up to the condo but reiterated that she did not want to go through with the act. She expressed fears of being thrown around like a rag doll by McMahon and physical therapist. After Ms. Grant clearly stated she wanted to back out, McMahon responded by telling Ms. Grant for the first time that he loved her, stunning her into silence. McMahon's manipulative tactic resulted in the outcome he wanted, and he led her down the stairs to the bedroom where the physical therapist was already waiting to begin the threesome. Early in the encounter, McMahon immediately directed Ms. Grant to lay down on her back in a supplicating position while straddling over her. McMahon defecated on Ms. Grant's head. McMahon left to shower off, but he instructed Ms. Grant to remain in place with the excrement in her hair and to continue performing for his friend. While Ms. Grant requested protection, none was offered. McMahon and physical therapist actively continued with the threesome and directed Ms. Grant's sexual performance for around an hour and a half while she was left covered in feces. Following the threesome on May 11th, McMahon sent an explicit message to Ms. Grant that further detailed his fantasies of seeing her engaged in sexual relations. I love it. That's you, Janel. You just can't get enough, can you? In the future, it's going to be so bad. It's so fucking embarrassing. Anybody who's going to type with just the letter instead of typing out the word. It's literally the most embarrassing thing that you can do as somebody who is communicating through text. It really just makes you look like a fucking child, and it is annoying as shit. In the future, it's going to be so bad that you'll demand to be fucked twice a day, and not just with blank, which I'm assuming is physical therapist, in a three-way. Why not let others see the beautiful, voluptuous body and watch you shake uncontrollably when you come? They'll go out of their minds. Then I'll find more friends, and we'll tie you up so you're helpless. I'll direct them to have their way any way they want. Who can make you scream the loudest? Scream. Maybe I'll just line them up and have them squirt in your mouth, your pussy, all over your tits and ass, all at the same time. You'll be covered in cum and we'll make you eat it all and taste everybody's cum. The next morning, you'll be a little sore, but you're still going to want more after all that fucking over and over. McMahon then pressured Ms. Grant into several additional threesomes, in large part because she felt she had no other choice, particularly after McMahon's comments that he had personally ensured that she had not lost her job. Her subsequent run-ins with the physical therapist at Alternative Clinic also served as a reminder of how much was at stake if she did not obey. McMahon controlled Ms. Grant's employment, income, paid for her medical care, circulated naked pictures of her, and ignored her. Lack of consent for the first threesome. Indeed, when text conversations would begin to cross over from McMahon's fantasies into reality, Ms. Grant often attempted to avoid physical encounters with a physical therapist, as on September 23rd, 2020, when she told McMahon there was no room for a third body. After the threesomes began, McMahon became more sadistic, and his fantasies focused on control, such as choking, sensory deprivation, pain, humiliation, and group scenarios in which Miss Grant was to be physically overwhelmed and subservient. R.E. your last picture. You need your panties ripped off and 3 big black dicks in all 3 holes at the same time. Way up your pussy and way up your ass as far as they will go, but even farther. And the thickest cock goes down your throat so it makes you gag and convulse as those big black cocks pound away. It feels like from the start you're being assaulted, but it's made you come nonstop. Just one continuous constant orgasm, and just before you pass out, those big black dicks squirt their loads of cum inside you. As you lay on your stomach, the cum is coming out of all your holes. I'll turn you over and jack off all over you. What the fuck? On one occasion, he instructed Miss Grant, do not knock on the door, because if I see you, I will rape you in the hallway. To leave no doubt regarding the dynamic of their relationship. On May 12th, 2020, McMahon texted Ms. Grant, I'm the only one who owns you and controls you, who I want to fuck you. A theme that was often reiterated throughout their involvement. On June of 2020, Ms. Grant sent text to McMahon noting her 1-year anniversary in joining WWE. McMahon ignored her. A month later, McMahon reminded Ms. Grant about the far-reaching results of his texting out explicit content of her. By now, thousands of men see you every day all over the world. They all want to fuck you. Around this time, McMahon openly shared explicit photographs and salacious stories about Ms. Grant with WWE crew at TV tapings, a group McMahon also referred to as her fan club. Indeed, McMahon exuberantly messaged her a truthful story of having just shared explicit content of her with a group of 12 men on the WWE tech crew and recounted the obscene details he shared with them. I just passed my phone around to a bunch of guys on the tech crew. They were screaming, OMG, she's fucking beautiful. Look at that ass. I'd like to get that. I paused to count out loud how many guys there were. 12. I then said, okay, there's 12 of you, and she would love to fuck each and every one of you at one time. The guys cheered, but she will only do it if she takes 3 at the time. That brought a huge reaction. She wants one deep down in her ass, one way down her throat, and one in her pussy, and you can pound her and keep on pounding to her till you pop your load. She may scream and try to say no, although it would be difficult to say anything with a cock down her throat. They laughed. I then said, listen, no. No matter what, just pound away till you squirt. Baby, these guys were having a blast with me. Some of them didn't believe me, so I said, you are the greatest fuck in the world, and no matter how much you get, you always wanted more. And then I said, she loves cum, baby. These techs, as we call them, were having the time of their lives, listening to my truthful story. I then said you would take a 10-minute break between each fucking, but then you would get back on your hands and knees with your ass in the air and say, okay, I'm ready, who's next? LOL. I drove the fucking LOL. What the fuck? What the fuck? Oh my God. You drove them wild. I just imagine if this really happened, baby, how much cum you would have coming out of all of your holes. Jesus fucking Christ. I need a drink. The LOL is just fucking insane. On the occasions when Miss Grant informed McMahon that she was physically injured during their sexual encounter, McMahon's response varied from apologies to non-accountable pushback and blaming impulse control. When encounters were particularly brutal, Ms. Grant learned to bookend the truths of her injuries with compliments to create the least amount of pushback from Mr. McMahon. However, Ms. Grant sustained brutal and painful injuries, including bleeding, swelling, bruising, and spans of incontinence resulting from McMahon's forceful use of its fists, adult toys, and objects unsafe for vaginal insertion or penetration. For instance, on August 28th, Ms. Grant texted McMahon that she was injured during their latest sexual encounter. As a result of McMahon's insistence on penetrating Miss Grant with extra large sex toys, including a vibrating wand that caused her to panic, McMahon ignored Miss Grant's warning that the device was not meant for insertion and forcefully shoved the wand inside of her so deeply that it became stuck for a period. Oh my fucking God. She texted she was in pain and bleeding a lot between last night and today, and I'm on the floor right now because I can't get comfortable. And on August 29th, she texted him an update that she was still really uncomfortable and I got hurt in some ways that I'm having trouble describing. McMahon did apologize, saying that sometimes I just get carried away. What? That's not getting carried away. That's just fucking completely dehumanizing the person that you're with. Jesus fucking Christ. During this time, Ms. Grant became so sick from the stress of the situations that McMahon had subjected her to that her weight plummeted to just over 100 pounds, which McMahon ignored. One distressing event occurred on November 21st, 2020, when McMahon drove Ms. Grant to WWE headquarters to fulfill his fantasy of having a sexual encounter with her in his office, causing Ms. Grant to suffer a panic attack in the passenger seat while pleading with McMahon to change his mind and drive her back home. McMahon scoffed and then gave her an ultimatum: either have a sexual encounter in his office or inside the parked car. Terrified, Ms. Grant obeyed McMahon's directions, and they entered the WWE headquarters for the encounter. Further, despite Ms. Grant's repeated statements that she did not consent to threesomes with McMahon and physical therapist, McMahon advertised her to the others and told her that he had found another person to join them, defendant John Laurinaitis. It's very interesting to me that the physical therapist is not named, but John Laurinaitis is. Obviously, John Laurinaitis has a lot more connections with the company, but it's just an interesting note, like, of who is and isn't named. Is all, right? Like, there's a lot of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This is Brock Lesnar, but then we have John Laurinaitis, right, as a defendant. So I'm wondering if maybe the things that he has done are just more egregious and we just haven't gotten to them yet. In November 2020, McMahon pressed Ms. Grant to make explicit photos and videos to send to Laurinaitis. McMahon orchestrated exchanges by instructing Ms. Grant when to create explicit content for Laurinaitis, including what to say, and provided her with notes to adjust her performance. McMahon then facilitated the exchange of explicit content back and forth between Ms. Grant and Laurinaitis. Notably, even once phone numbers were exchanged between Ms. Grant and Laurinaitis, McMahon insisted that he be privy to any messages that Ms. Grant sent to Laurinaitis, and demanded that she reported back about all interactions, further illustrating the level of control he held over Ms. Grant. On or about December 29th, a threesome was arranged between McMahon, Laurinaitis, and Ms. Grant at McMahon's condo. McMahon instructed her to tell Laurinaitis that she was a neighbor and girlfriend working in the legal field, but not at WWE. Shortly after meeting Laurinaitis, Ms. Grant asked him if she was the first woman who McMahon had introduced him in such a setting. Laurinaitis failed to respond and shot a look directly at McMahon, who quickly intervened by kissing Ms. Grant and initiating the sexual encounter amongst the three of them. Once again, Ms. Grant asked for protection. Once again, her request was denied after an assurance that Laurinaitis was clean. In the days that followed, McMahon texted her that Laurinaitis hugged me like a bear and said thank you to me about 12 times already. In contrast, Laurinaitis messaged Ms. Grant, "Thanks for the fun afternoon." What the fuck? Like, it's just like, oh yeah, by the way, that was fucking awesome. Thanks, thanks for what you did for me. I really appreciate it. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again soon. Like, it's fucked up. On or around January 25th of 2021, Ms. Grant was reassigned to directly support WWE's new hire, a high-ranking employee in the legal department. On February 5th, 2021, McMahon sent Ms. Grant to establish a schedule for when other men could have sex with Ms. Grant, which Ms. Grant attempted to rebuff. Exactly, baby. He's not the only one. Burp called me this afternoon begging to eat you and fuck you with his dick, and with his nice and hard, don't forget it's and hard, dick. Give me another week, baby, and I'll be ready. I'm feeling more like myself. It's not great, but it's getting better. Tell him soon. I already told him, baby. By the way, Johnny wants Tuesdays, but not this coming one, and the occasional Saturday, but maybe I can shift it to Thursday nights. Johnny would like all of the above. I'm assuming that's John Laurinaitis. Seeing that that's a name that is not blocked out. That's got to be Laurinaitis. Text like this, a shift schedule, caused Ms. Grant to suffer breakdowns over how her original hope for a new life had been reduced to an objectified and dehumanized existence with no way out. On or about March 6, 2021, a second threesome between McMahon, Laurinaitis, and Ms. Grant occurred. In March of 2021, WWE had still not hired a replacement after WWE Corporate Office No. 4's termination in November of 2020. On March 9th of 2021, McMahon informed Ms. Grant, still an entry-level coordinator, that top executives in the company knew about their relationship and that her presence in the legal department was effectively delaying the company's efforts to hire a new replacement for this high-ranking official, reinforcing the fact that many within the company were well aware of the circumstances detailed herein. As a result, McMahon stated that the plan was for her to change departments, and he verbally directed Ms. Grant to transfer to the Talent Relations Department, reporting to Laurinaitis. On March 10th, Ms. Grant sent McMahon a text message recapping their conversation and expressing shock and a range of concerns, including about Laurinaitis. Essentially, Ms. Grant expected a desire to be treated humanely and taken seriously, which she acknowledged would be an uphill battle. Unfortunately, Ms. Grant's transfer to the Talent Relations Department came with the expectation from both McMahon and Laurinaitis that she engage with Laurinaitis sexually, both physically and with explicit content. On March 10th of 2021, the corporate officer number 2 informed Grant that the day that she would be officially moved to Talent Relations and would quickly begin reporting to Laurinaitis, although details about her role, including a title and salary, was still being firmed up. In essence, Ms. Grant found herself in a completely undefined role, except for understanding that she remained a sexual slave to be used and trafficked by McMahon within the WWE. On March 12th of 21, McMahon reminded her of the connection between her job and her role as a sexual object. Let's work hard and play hard too. On March 16th, 2021, Ms. Grant was directed to pick up a key to Laurinaitis' hotel room and serve herself to him as breakfast before the start of work. McMahon constantly reinforced the expectation that Ms. Grant sexually performed for him and for her new boss, Laurinaitis, both in and out of the office. McMahon wrote on March 22nd, "Do you promise to make me proud, baby? Will you show him what a porn star you can be? Will you show off for me like never before? And on days when he's in town, I want him to fuck you every morning and later in the office too." McMahon also indicated on April 2nd, 2021, that Ms. Grant should obey if Laurinaitis wanted to bring in yet more men. Maybe he wants 2 other guys to join you with him. Holy shit, you've told him you would do anything with him. So if he surprised you with 2 others, you would have no alternative than to take them on. OMG, the stories you could tell them then. It makes me want to come right now. By the way, I just thought of what I think is an excellent idea. Maybe you can hint that if he knows someone who can be discreet, it might be better if you and Johnny try him out first so he can get more comfortable before he is introduced to me. Actually, that makes total sense, doesn't it? In April 2021, WWE Senior Vice President of Human Resources was fired. The same month, McMahon informed Ms. Grant that she would be given the title of Vice President Operations within the Talent Relations Department. However, days later, McMahon backtracked and said that she would be the Director of Operations instead to avoid suspension of a sudden promotion to Vice President. During this conversation, McMahon told Ms. Grant that he had expressed to other WWE management that he wanted her to reach the level of vice president and spend a year or 2 in the position, as she would be able to take the experience anywhere. Ms. Grant left this conversation with McMahon, hoping that she could escape this situation with her finances and reputation intact. She just needed to survive until that point. In an April 2020 meeting between Ms. Grant and WWE Corporate Officer Number 2, he acknowledged that the jump initially proposed to Vice President was too big and could put a target on Ms. Grant's back. Nevertheless, Corporate Officer Number 2 presented Ms. Grant with paperwork detailing a base salary increase to $200,000 as Director of Operations. As soon as Ms. Grant began working directly for Laurinaitis, forcibly touching and overtly sexual behaviors became part of daily life when he was in the office. On numerous occasions, Ms. Grant was directed to visit Laurinaitis at his hotel room before work to serve herself to him as his breakfast. These devastating experiences made Ms. Grant feel as though she were being pimped out as an object for sexual gratification for her new boss. Upon information and belief, corporate funds from the WWE were used to finance Laurinaitis' hotel stays when these coerced sexual encounters occurred. Per McMahon's instructions, Ms. Grant reported interactions with Laurinaitis back to McMahon, for whom the stories served as a source of arousal. The arrangement with Laurinaitis left Ms. Grant miserable and enraged. However, in her years of experience with McMahon, she knew her request to stop would be ignored at best or used to destroy her career and reputation at worst. Ms. Grant was further left feeling isolated by colleagues and surveilled by the top-level employees within WWE. Professionally and personally, Ms. Grant's fate was entirely in the hands of McMahon, Laurinaitis, and the other WWE executives who enabled her abuse. On May 24th of 2021, the McMahon messaged Ms. Grant to remind her that a mistake would destroy her career and that she should pursue verbal communication rather than written where possible. Those compliments will keep on coming, baby. Just wait and see. I totally understand and agree in regards to being scared of communication and photos. Johnny gets drunk and sloppy and can easily make a mistake that could cost him his job and yours too. Verbal communication is the way to go. That said, have you and Johnny talked about breakfast tomorrow? Breakfast. Remember, guys, breakfast. We haven't discussed it at all. It's up in the air. Johnny complained about getting a new phone and it just arrived. I haven't set up time to coordinate setting it up with IT because I need him to assure me that he's erased everything he's ever saved. Truly, I regret that he ever got pics. It's not worth the stress I'm feeling. I'm done with it. Panic that someone else's mistake could cost Ms. Grant her livelihood left her feeling helpless and afraid of what would happen if McMahon's mood shifted, leading her to message him expressions of loyalty, love, and submission as a coping mechanism, and with the hope that he would protect her. On June 14th of 2021, Ms. Grant again told McMahon that she did not want to engage in sexual encounters with Laurinaitis, adding, "I've left that hotel feeling bad about myself every time." McMahon responded that the one-on-one encounters would cease, but that he expected threesomes with Laurinaitis to continue. McMahon and Laurinaitis confined Ms. Grant in an office for an abusive sexual assault at WWE headquarters. So we got the McMahon and Laurinaitis confined Ms. Grant in an office for an abusive sexual assault at WWE headquarters. The following morning on June 15th, 2021, at approximately 7:51 a.m., Ms. Grant messaged McMahon that due to her work on an important project that she did not want a threesome that week, as a threesome won't set me up for success, it'll knock me out. To avoid pushback from Ms. McMahon, Ms. Grant offered the following week instead. McMahon and Laurinaitis ignored her plea and brought her into Laurinaitis' office, forcibly touching and undressing her before forcing her to engage in a threesome on a conference table. Ms. Grant pled, "No, no, no, and please stop." McMahon responded with, "No means yes." Ms. Grant again told them to stop. Instead, McMahon licked his fingers and penetrated Ms. Grant and said, "Take it, bitch," with each taking turns, restraining her for the other. Laurinaitis then joined by forcibly shoving his tongue, then penis, into Ms. Grant's mouth. On June 23rd, 2021, around 11:42 a.m., McMahon directed Ms. Grant in the middle of a workday to meet him on a lower floor. When Ms. Grant arrived, McMahon led her inside his private locker room, locked the door, and forced himself on her over a massage table. Later that day, $15,000 in gift cards to Bloomingdale's were purchased at McMahon's direction and delivered by McMahon's personal assistant to Ms. Grant in her office. On multiple other occasions while Ms. Grant worked under Laurinaitis, including after McMahon's promise that one-on-one encounters would end, and even after his wife moved across the country to join Laurinaitis, he would call Ms. Grant to his office, lock the door, unzip his pants, and instruct Ms. Grant to perform oral sex. Through all of this, Ms. Grant noticed that the less she sexually engaged with Laurinaitis, the less work she had, as Laurinaitis began to belittle Ms. Grant in front of colleagues. Fearing for herself and her future, Ms. Grant asked Laurinaitis whether he still supported her. Supported a promotion to Bright Vice President. He deflected with an answer about considering all options and changed the topic. The extreme uncertainty and fear for her future exacerbated Ms. Grant's physical symptoms of illness, including gastrointestinal issues and vomiting, which continued to worsen over the remainder of her time with WWE. McMahon uses Ms. Grant as a sexual pawn to entice world-famous wrestling talent and to keep WWE Superstar under contract with WWE. WWE Superstar is famous worldwide as a top talent with WWE, with a large collective fan base that helps generate viewership and drives in-person attendance, all of which enrich WWE and McMahon. Upon information and belief, McMahon began to recruit WWE superstars for a sexual encounter with Ms. Grant while she was still a coordinator in the legal department. By July of 2021, McMahon informed Ms. Grant that the WWE superstar would be their next playmate. As in other instances, McMahon described his fantasy of seeing Ms. Grant engaged in unmerciful sexual acts with the WWE superstar, during which he would rip her open. McMahon also confided to Ms. Grant that he wanted to have WWE superstar under a new contract, while WWE Superstar indicated an interest in a return to other professional endeavors. On or about July 12th, 2021, McMahon directed Ms. Grant to create personalized sexual content for the WWE Superstar. McMahon shared the photos with the WWE Superstar and then informed Ms. Grant that he likes what he sees. On July 21st, 2021, McMahon flew and or caused WWE Superstar to fly on a jet into a local airport and travel into Connecticut across state lines for what McMahon described to Ms. Grant as a business dinner, as well as a sexual encounter with Ms. Grant in McMahon's condo. Upon information and belief, the dinner was to discuss WWE Superstar's continued involvement with WWE. Prior to the business dinner with McMahon, the WWE Superstar made a brief visit to Ms. Grant's building. However, the Superstar did not return to the building for a sexual encounter because he was too intoxicated and taken back to the plane. Later that evening, after McMahon recounted the story about his dinner with WWE Superstar to Ms. Grant, he sought to salvage the night with a request that they role-play a sexual encounter in which McMahon acted as if he were the Superstar. McMahon was so physically rough with Ms. Grant during this encounter that Ms. Grant begged McMahon to stop numerous times, including loud cries of "Help, I'm serious and I'm scared," as he, among other things, penetrated her, fisted her, pulled her hair, pinned her, shoved her, and open palm slapped her. McMahon's assault caused Miss Grant to break down weeping and curl into the fetal position, with her arms pulled up to protect her face. McMahon alternated between slaps and shoves before admitting that "I'm really fucking up with you right and left tonight, huh?" So there's a lot of speculation and belief that this is Brock Lesnar, that Brock Lesnar is who the Superstar is, because it was something about former UFC heavyweight champion. There's not a lot of those that exist that are wrestling in WWE today. Also, when you're talking about like among the biggest of the stars that kind of exist, it's got to be Brock Lesnar. This is fucking incredible and just incredibly hilarious that Vince McMahon would role play as Brock Lesnar and then just beat the shit out of this woman. It's the most ridiculous thing that I've heard, and there's a bunch of dumb shit that's been fucking happening this entire time. I mean, from the dildos to, I mean, everything else that's been discussed. It's just so incredibly asinine, and just fucking insane. But yeah, just having Vince McMahon pretending to be Brock Lesnar, fucking taking this woman to Suplex City. Jesus Christ. McMahon forbade Miss Grant from leaving his condo that night unless she could verbally assure him that there wasn't a problem and everything between them was okay. Notably, however, he made no effort to check on her well-being after she left his condo. On August 26, 2021, WWE held its second biggest annual event, SummerSlam, in Las Vegas's Allegiant Stadium. Around this time, McMahon and WWE Superstar privately reached an informal agreement about his return. That night, McMahon texted Ms. Grant a reminder that she was an enslaved object to him. "I want to drive you lower and lower, so low that you might beg me to sell you." Emphasis added. McMahon continued to advertise a sexual encounter with Ms. Grant to WWE Superstar during the formal negotiation of a new booking contract with WWE. Here's what blank said. "After I told him that part of the deal was fucking you. LOL, that's your turf. She will be ruined after me and leave your ass. Plus, after me, your tool won't fit anymore." Emojis. In December 2021, McMahon gave Ms. Grant's personal cell phone number to WWE Superstar and promised she'll do anything requested of her. In the days that followed, the WWE Superstar revealed a fetish to Ms. Grant and tested McMahon's promise that Ms. Grant would do anything with a request that she send a video of herself urinating. Unable to recognize herself, Ms. Grant went numb and obeyed. The Superstar informed Ms. Grant if she had not complied with the request, the Superstar would have lost any interest to her and then called her a bitch. That same month, the Superstar expressed to Ms. Grant his desire to set a play date and have a sexual encounter. However, a snowstorm changed the Superstar's travel plans, and Ms. Grant ultimately used the weather and COVID-19 as an excuse to back out. Which isn't the first time that there is an excuse that said superstar doesn't get involved in the situation, because even previously it was like, hey, you can show up to her apartment and she'll do anything you want, and then he was too intoxicated in order to do anything. So it's kind of interesting on multiple occasions that that they're unable to make it. Ultimately, is kind of the idea. Very, very curiouser and curiouser. McMahon tells Miss Grant that his wife has learned about her and pressures Miss Grant for an NDA. In early January 2022, McMahon abruptly distanced himself from Miss Grant, saying that he could not speak to or be in the same room as her. On January 9th, 2022, McMahon agreed to speak with Ms. Grant at his condo. During this meeting, McMahon told Ms. Grant that his wife, Linda McMahon, had learned about his relationship with Ms. Grant, that he was losing his condo, and that she would divorce him. He added, too, that a public divorce would make Ms. Grant a headline. Purportedly to salvage his marriage and avoid both the negative publicity and other repercussions of a divorce, McMahon wanted to ensure that Miss Grant would remain silent about his personal misconduct in order to preserve his controlling interest in WWE. McMahon told Miss Grant that if she left WWE and signed an NDA, he was confident Linda McMahon would not divorce him. He would remain in the condo and Miss Grant would avoid reputational harm. McMahon instructed Ms. Grant that she should not go back to the office and immediately lessen her involvement on open work items. Ms. Grant expressed concerns about both her name being mentioned in the media and the loss of control over her image, especially as McMahon had shared content of her for close to 2 years, and the ramifications for her career. McMahon suggested that he would attempt to help keep Ms. Grant's reputation intact and that he or WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 would personally help Ms. Grant find another job. McMahon also instructed Ms. Grant not to share this news with anyone and suggested she offer health-related excuses if asked about leaving WWE. Regarding the MDA, Ms. Grant asked McMahon, "Is this when Jerry sends the papers?" McMahon nodded and assured Ms. Grant that they would be in the driver's seat to iron out terms together, but she would need an attorney to make things official, and approved of Ms. Grant asking Celebrity Doctor for attorney referral. Following his discussion, McMahon led Ms. Grant to his bedroom for another sexual encounter. On January 14th, 2022, McMahon sent Ms. Grant a to-do list for purposes of effectuating the NDA, such as retaining counsel, and also included an offer for one-on-one career coaching. McMahon suggested that the list had been drafted by WWE Corporate Officer Number 2. Before Ms. Grant retained counsel, McMahon discussed the amount of money that would be exchanged for the NDA and settled on a lump sum of $3 million after Ms. Grant told McMahon his initial offer of $1 million was not enough to compensate for the lost earning potential and the fact that she would be unable to continue the promised career trajectory of vice president, as well as failing to last as a director for a full year. Before Ms. Grant retained counsel, McMahon called Ms. Grant with an update and informed her that McMahon's attorney and counsel for WWE insisted on installment payments due to cash flow purposes. When Ms. Grant responded that this reasoning did not make sense for a billionaire, McMahon insisted that it was not his idea. On or about January 19th, Ms. Grant advised McMahon that she had contacted Celebrity Doctor about an attorney referral, and on that physician's recommendation, and upon McMahon's approval, she signed a retainer agreement with a lawyer later that day. On January 24th, McMahon continued to engage in sexual text message exchange with Ms. Grant, including encouraging her to send an explicit photo to WWE Superstar. McMahon also requested Ms. Grant send him content she had sent to WWE Superstar. The negotiations of the NDA were brief, lasting only 8 days. Ms. Grant reminded McMahon that the NDA ought to address people who knew about their relationship, including but not limited to Corporate Officer Number 1, Corporate Officer Number 2, John Laurinaitis, and McMahon's personal assistants. Ms. Grant and her attorney sought to incorporate the list of individuals who had knowledge of the relationship into a Schedule A in the NDA. Ms. Grant's requested revisions were flatly rejected by McMahon and WWE, who reverted to their original draft rather than incorporate any of her proposed changes, with the exception that as of the date of execution, Ms. Grant would not speak of the relationship. On or around January 26th, McMahon articulated an even more pressing need to get the NDA signed immediately, informing Ms. Grant that he was under a tight deadline to report pending or threatened legal actions to the WWE Board of Directors, specifically the audit community, and that McMahon and his attorney would not do or could not do so unless Ms. Grant signed the NDA. He informed Ms. Grant that the board members were concerned about the delay. Furthermore, McMahon repeatedly pressed Ms. Grant to stop her attorney from any further wordsmithing and blamed Ms. Grant's attorney for not understanding the urgency of the situation. Also, despite any previous approval, McMahon now expressed that both he and his attorney had concerns about Ms. Grant's attorney and warned her that her counsel could not be trusted, which in turn caused Ms. Grant to question her trust in her personal attorney. On or around January 26th, Ms. Grant became so overwhelmed that she asked to simply give notice without the need for a payment, or even offering to sign a napkin or post it as a sign of goodwill. McMahon flatly rejected her desire to back out. On January 27th, 2022, just 8 days after Ms. Grant had hired an attorney, McMahon left Ms. Grant a lengthy audio message explaining why they needed to go through with the NDA, pushing her to hurry up and sign the NDA and advising that he would be double fucked if she did not, presumably referring to both his divorce and the report to the board of directors. Between on January 27th and January 28th, there were unresolved edits that led to panicked phone calls, including an attorney confidentiality clause and signatory line that Ms. Grant's counsel said he would never sign. Also, the deadline to sign the NDA was pushed up from January 31st to January 28th. McMahon continued to pressure Ms. Grant with calls during which he pleaded, demanded, threatened, and begged her to sign the NDA, and reminded her that by not signing, she would jeopardize him, the company, and his family, and that she would surely become the subject of national headlines and ruin her reputation if she did not sign the NDA by the start of WWE's live programming schedule on January 28th. Are you aware people are calling for Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon to be removed from upcoming WWE 2? On Twitter, people are planning to boycott the upcoming WWE 2K game. I mean, this is fucking nuts. I mean, the entire situation is insane. I've obviously, especially with the Royal Rumble being like literally in like 2 days, I'm very curious on what, if anything, is going to come from this. But obviously, especially with 2K24, right? Anything that has fucking, especially since Brock Lesnar has been so intimately tied, and also the speculation of anybody else being intimately tied to this situation, it's fucking insane. In a state of mental defeat and fear from McMahon's threat, Ms. Grant succumbed to his unrelenting pressure and signed the NDA just before the deadline on January 28th. On February 4th, Ms. Grant was wired $1 million as the first installment of the NDA. On February 28th, Ms. Grant was wired $10,000 to cover her attorney's fees incurred in connection with the NDA. Both wires were sent with originator described as Vincent K. McMahon, care of WWF, and originator address 1241 East Main Street, Stamford, Connecticut, 06902, United States. On February 9th and 10th, Ms. Grant gave notice to Laurinaitis and put human resources at WWE on official notice that she was leaving the WWE. After signing the NDA, Ms. Grant continued to ask about who had told Linda McMahon, as she was concerned about her ability to obtain employment in the future. McMahon responded that it did not matter and that he was tired of her questions. After the NDA was signed, McMahon, wearing only a white robe, met Miss Grant in his condo to review outstanding business items. As Miss Grant was proceeding to the door to leave, McMahon grabbing her arm before she exited and commanded her to do one last thing and get on your knees, all in quotations. Press conference, many journalists who are attending have said they will be questioning and writing about the lawsuit. I mean, you have to. It's like the fucking biggest thing to come out. I mean, obviously there's been ruminations of fucking Vince McMahon being a fucking scum pest this entire time. Like, it's not really new news whatsoever. But generally, now it's like, now we have like substantiated shit that's coming to light. So it's like the best thing that you can hope for is that finally there's some sort of repercussions, because they already fucking kind of like dug into it. There was the board of directors were looking in like back a couple of years ago about, you know, all of this hush money that was being sent. There's been multiple sexual assault cases that have been kind of hushed against Vince McMahon. I mean, over the last like 40 years almost. So it's kind of like all of this shit is coming to a head. And it's just fucking insane. And I, if this is true, right? Because we always have to kind of go on this idea that innocent until proven guilty, blah, 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 bullshit, right? But if this is true, this is like a severe amount of shit that has been happening to this woman. And there's no way that this is the only one and the first one. I mean, he literally took a shit on this woman, like literally just shit on her head. So you don't go from, oh, I'm just a normal guy to I'm going to shit on somebody's head. That's not something that just comes out of nowhere. Like you kind of, your depravity builds up to that point. And especially if you've kind of put yourself in this position where you're dehumanizing women, like that's 100% where that shit is coming from. But yeah, there's absolutely no way that this is the only one if this is as stated. So I swear, I'm hoping that this is like just the beginning and more shit will come from this, because that's fucking awesome if it is. As Miss Grant knelt on the hard floor, barely a few feet away from the front door, McMahon opened his robe and ordered her to eat him. McMahon grabbed the back of Miss Grant's head and slammed her face into his crotch a couple of times until she gagged and pushed him away, telling him to stop and that she couldn't breathe. McMahon responded that she wouldn't get away that easily and held her head as he forced himself back in her mouth until she had no air. Miss Grant tried to push him away, but he held her head firmly in place and loudly commanded her to look up, followed by "Take it, bitch." The momentarily made eye contact before McMahon's force caused Miss Grant's body to convulse and retch with tears streaming down her face. McMahon then released his hold and closed his robe as she stood up. After leaving, Miss Grant never saw McMahon again. Oh, it's fucked up, dude. That's fucked up. On March 2nd, while Miss Grant was away on a trip to Florida, McMahon called Miss Grant to advise that it would probably be the last time she would hear from him, and if she needed anything, to contact WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 or Corporate Officer Number 2. Over the course of approximately a half-hour call, McMahon lamented both his inability to focus on the upcoming WrestleMania and how his personal life had blown up over the past few weeks. Towards the end of their conversation, McMahon and Miss Grant agreed to resume contact after WrestleMania. He also instructed Miss Grant to continue having sexual relations with other men, including WWE Superstar, in the meantime. On or around March 4th, 2022, WWE Superstar mentioned Miss Grant that he was in New York. In line with McMahon's orders, Miss Grant texted the Superstar explicit pictures. On March 27th, the Superstar reached out to Miss Grant again. Miss Grant interpreted these back-to-back advances as an indication of McMahon's continued control. On March 30th, Miss Grant's counsel received a call from McMahon's attorney, advising that there had been an anonymous email about the relationship between Miss Grant and McMahon and Laurinaitis. Later in June and July, stories were published regarding the matter of McMahon's multiple NDAs with various women associated with WWE and others. Miss Grant did not receive another payment under her NDA in February of 23. Further, despite assurances from McMahon that he would cover her medical care and the costs associated with her tax liability for the $1 million payment, McMahon has refused to cover those costs. McMahon continued to pay for Miss Grant's medical care until April 15th, when it abruptly ceased. Gifts given to plaintiff during the time with WWE in association with McMahon. From 2019 until early 2022, McMahon provided Miss Grant with gifts to keep her under McMahon's control. Upon information and belief, the gifts provided to Miss Grant included ones purchased by McMahon and expensed them to WWE. Examples of items received by Miss Grant from McMahon in 2019 included the following: Alternative Clinic medical cosmetic services and products, Clubhouse access tickets to the Belmont Stakes, WrestleMania private full-day transportation and premium tickets, a $2,000 Nordstrom gift card, a massive box of Godiva. Examples of items received by Miss Grant from McMahon in 2020, including the following: $20,000 towards surgery paid directly to the surgeon's office, a pearl diamond pave lariat necklace from Betteridge in Greenwich, Connecticut, blue cashmere knee-length cardigan, Blue Burberry check cashmere scarf, blue cashmere and fur hat, gray cashmere shawl, Celine sunglasses, cable knit throw blanket, and large bouquets of flowers delivered approximately every other week. Examples of items by Ms. Grant for McMahon in 2021, including the following: 2022 BMW 430xi, a $5,000 gift certificate at Lanfear Spa, 2 private chef-catered dinners in McMahon's condo, gold and diamond paved pay-per-click necklace from Betteridge and Greenwich, $15,000 in Bloomingdale's gift cards, food assortments display an antique tea ceremony set from Saudi Arabia, and large bouquets of flowers delivered approximately every other week. Ms. Grant was subordinate and vulnerable victim to predators, not a consenting and willing participant. Ms. Grant was groomed and coerced by McMahon and Laurinaitis, and the WWE stood by and facilitated efforts to keep Ms. Grant employed by the WWE to ensure McMahon's continued sexual exploitation. In addition to what Ms. Grant and her medical providers who examined her following the abuse will testify to, there is ample other evidence of Ms. Grant's mental state and her attempts to avoid the unfortunate circumstances she found herself in. In January of 2021, Ms. Grant sent a message to resident manager stating that she was miserable at WWE. I don't say it to Vince, but as grateful as I am for my job and my salary, I actually am miserable, mismanaged all the time. They admit they don't know what to do with me. Nobody gave a fuck when I was harassed and retaliated against, to the point of my reputation was questioned and my work was taken away. As further alleged throughout this complaint, Ms. Grant has frequently referred to as McMahon's bitch. On multiple occasions, Ms. Grant subjected to this treatment. As alleged herein, before Ms. Grant was being routinely directed by McMahon to engage in sexual contact with other men, Ms. Grant had expressed her apprehension about McMahon's fantasy, text manifesting and graduating into reality. Further, at nearly all relevant times, Ms. Grant was an employee of the WWE and could reasonably expect, at a minimum, to lose her position if she did not comply with the wishes of McMahon. As detailed herein, WWE knew of McMahon's illegal contact and did nothing to stop it. This is self-evident from the numerous executive level and board members who were privy to McMahon's involvement with Ms. Grant, as well as his prior incidents involving sexual misconduct. For instance, in or around March of 2021, Ms. Grant introduced herself to WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 when they passed one another in the hallway. Corporate Officer Number 1 responded by telling Ms. Grant that WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 knew exactly who she was. Corporate Officer Number 1 maintained an office suite on the executive fourth floor of WWE's company headquarters on 1241 East Main Street. Meanwhile, Ms. Grant's cubicle in the company's legal department was in a different building and across the street from WWE Corporate Office Number 1's office. Ms. Grant had no physical presence at 1241 East Main Street until the beginning of February 2021, when she began reporting to an attorney who kept an office in both buildings. Given that WWE Corporate Office Number 1, a very high-ranking WWE officer, and Ms. Grant was an entry-level coordinator in the legal department, it is unusual that WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 would know who Ms. Grant was at all at that point, except Corporate Officer Number 1 knew of Ms. Grant, at least in part, by hearing about the ongoing exploitation of Ms. Grant by McMahon. Following Ms. Grant's messages to McMahon on March 9th, McMahon summoned Ms. Grant to his condo that evening for a conversation during which McMahon confirmed that Officer Number 1 indeed knew exactly who she was, as McMahon had met privately with him and Corporate Officer Number 2 and advised these individuals of McMahon's connections to Ms. Grant. McMahon continued this conversation by detailing to Ms. Grant that they had expressed concern but were ultimately supportive. McMahon also advised Ms. Grant that one or both of WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 and/or Corporate Officer Number 2 inquired whether Ms. Grant could be trusted, and that McMahon offered assurances that Ms. Grant would not do something to hurt the WWE. Knowledge on the part of WWE is further illustrated by the multiple meetings Ms. Grant had about the initial hiring and subsequent position changes, including a number of such meetings with the Corporate Officer Number 2, and the voice memo McMahon sent Ms. Grant the following morning on March 10th, mentioning the names of both Corporate Officer Number 1 and Corporate Officer Number 2 in connection with the new role. It's unusual for the executive chairman and CEO to name drop two of the company's highest ranking officers in connection with the coordinator's first job promotion, especially as there are human resource partners assigned to each department. Corporate Officer Number 4 was a high-ranking legal department employee at WWE until November of 2020. Upon information and belief, the Corporate Officer Number 4 was terminated or asked to resign for the Corporate Officer Number 4's position at WWE. McMahon expressed to Miss Grant that the Corporate Officer Number 4, while still employed at WWE, knew or highly suspected that a sexual relationship existed between McMahon and Miss Grant. Upon information and belief, Corporate Officer Number 4 articulated Corporate Officer Number 4's knowledge and or suspicion to at least one other executive. Knowledge on the part of the WWE is further illustrated by the fact that Miss Grant's presence became more visible over time, including during executive committee meetings, which were attended by individuals who had either direct knowledge of McMahon's sexual exploitation of Miss Grant or were otherwise suspicious. Given Miss Grant's length of employment and job title, it was an abnormal sign of different and special treatment for her to attend such meetings, especially when the executive head of the department, Laurinaitis, was in attendance as well. Notably, Ms. Grant inquired with WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 and Corporate Officer Number 2 about whether it was appropriate for her to attend these meetings. Additionally, Corporate Officer Number 3, another high-ranking official and member of the board of directors at the time of Ms. Grant's employment with WWE, motioned for Ms. Grant to sit in a chair near Corporate Officer Number 3 at the boardroom table during one of the meetings. Upon information and belief, Corporate Officer Number 3 knew of other instances of McMahon engaging in inappropriate sexual conduct. Upon information and belief, numerous other independent contractor employees, as well as executives and or board members within WWE, knew of suspected McMahon's misconduct involving Ms. Grant, included by being shown explicit photos of Ms. Grant by McMahon. McMahon directed a single attorney to negotiate the NDA on behalf of WWE and McMahon, both parties to the agreement. McMahon's abuse of Ms. Grant did not come as a surprise to anyone at WWE because he had faced numerous prior accusations of sexual misconduct, including in 1994, former WWE referee Rita Chatterton alleged that McMahon had raped her after luring her into a limousine to discuss her career. She recounted it for a New York magazine. "I was forced into oral sex with Vince McMahon. When I couldn't complete his desires, he got really angry, started ripping off my jeans, pulled me on top of him, and told me again that if I wanted $500,000 a year contract, that I had to satisfy him. He could make me or break me, and if I didn't satisfy him, I was blackballed. That was it. I was done." In February of 2006, the Palm Beach Post reported that McMahon had shown nude pictures of himself to a tanning booth attendant at Tanzabar in Boca Raton, Florida, and subsequently made unwelcome advances and finally cornered her in a tanning booth and groped her. A former spa manager at a California resort accused McMahon of assault at the resort in 2011. Like I said, continued behavior. To further illustrate knowledge of the culture of sexual misconduct at WWE, top-level executives not only failed to properly investigate abuse, but also compounded Ms. Grant's suffering by making public statements that trivialized the harm perpetrated upon her. These are just a few examples as to how the WWE and its most senior officials knew about and fostered a culture where the venture of harassment and sexual exploitation of women was tolerated to further the business and financial interests of WWE. Given, among the other things, the history of misconduct involved other women, the notice provided by McMahon to senior leadership at WWE, rumors about the relationship within WWE headquarters, the widespread sharing of Ms. Grant's pictures, including her face, to those inside the company by McMahon, the atypical hiring of Ms. Grant, and the atypical advancement of Ms. Grant within WWE, WWE clearly knew of Mr. McMahon's misconduct involving Ms. Grant and or recklessly disregarded facts available to them. As detailed herein, the NDA signed by Ms. Grant, McMahon, and WWE was entered into through coercive tactics and it is legally unenforceable pursuant to federal statute and common law. Exhibit A attached hereto is a true and accurate copy of the NDA. The NDA violates the Speaks Out Act and is thus unenforceable. The NDA is also void and unenforceable because the confidentiality term, a core term, is overly broad on its face. As written, it would prevent Ms. Grant from saying anything to anyone about WWE or her employment there, which of course she would need to do to apply for a job, for example, let alone exposing McMahon and other sexual assaults and abuse of Ms. Grant. The NDAs that McMahon was used to silence other women may be equally unenforceable if the same language was used. Ms. Grant was moreover coerced into signing the NDA merely 8 days after she first spoke to an attorney whom McMahon initially approved of and then cautioned Ms. Grant against trusting, before she was railroaded into rejecting all of her own attorney's comments. This occurred because of relentless pressure, including implicit and explicit threats by McMahon. The NDA did not even include basic terms she was promised by McMahon, including that he would pay for her lawyers, medical care, and taxes. Regardless, even if it were enforceable, McMahon has breached a core term of the NDA. He paid $1 million, but failed to make any further payments, including the installment of $500,000 that was to be paid within 10 days of February 1st, under the Section VB of the agreement. Furthermore, circumstances have changed, and that Ms. Grant's name has now been publicly released through no fault of her own, which impacts employment prospects and has led to further trauma and humiliation. As detailed herein, Ms. Grant was exploited during her time of employment with WWE and was subjected to countless depraved and humiliating acts, which has led to severe and permanent trauma. She has been further traumatized by having to relive those experiences when giving evidence to the government in connection with their investigations of WWE. Indeed, Ms. Grant's trauma and ongoing fears of additional retaliation was so severe that she required extended inpatient treatment. Today, she lives with so much anxiety and depression that she is unable to leave her residence for weeks at a time out of fear and PTSD. Due to this trauma, the inability to leave her home, Ms. Grant was terminated from her employment on January 27th of 2023, where she lost not only her dream job of managing her building, but the only job she could procure without the need for any references. Mrs. Grant's lost income is $80,000 per year. The severe restrictions of the NDA have created a wedge in all of Ms. Grant's relationships and left her in a perpetual state of isolation, as her family has passed away and she cannot and does not lean on the support of the community due to the NDA's restrictions. Further, Ms. Grant has experienced weight loss, insomnia, rashes, flashbacks to her exploitation, nightmare, panic attacks, and depression. Ms. Grant will go days without brushing her teeth, taking a shower, or washing her clothes. On many days, she doesn't leave her bed. Ms. Grant will prove at trial that she will need lifelong treatment because of the pain and suffering inflicted upon her by the defendants. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 270 as if fully stated herein. The NDA attached as Exhibit A was entered into on January 28th. The Speak Out Act was enacted on December 7th and applies with respect to a claim that is filed under federal, state, or tribal law on or after December 7th. The Speak Out Act defines a sexual assault dispute as a dispute involving a non-consensual sexual act or sexual contact, as such terms are defined in Section 2246 of Title 18 or similar applicable tribal or state law, including when the victim lacks capacity to consent, and a sexual harassment dispute as a dispute relating to the conduct that is alleged to constitute sexual harassment under applicable federal, tribal, or state law. The Speak Out Act provides that with respect to a sexual assault dispute or sexual harassment dispute, no non-disclosure clause or non-disparagement clause agreed to before the dispute arises shall be judicially unenforceable in instances in which conduct is alleged to have violated federal, tribal, or state law. The allegations herein include sexual harassment and assault disputes as defined by the Speak Out Act, and the NDA seeks to bar the claims brought herein. Because the claims themselves constitute the dispute as of the date of this complaint filing, then pursuant of the Speak Out Act, the core term of the NDA, and thus the NDA itself, is judicially unenforceable, and plaintiff is entitled to declaratory judgment. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 277 as fully stated herein. The NDA appearing at Exhibit A is void and unenforceable pursuant to the Connecticut common law for at least 5 reasons. First, the scope of the NDA, including the confidentiality provision, is impermissibly broad. It provides Ms. Grant will not disclose, discuss, or reveal any claims against or information about McMahon, her relationship with McMahon, WWE, or any employees or independent contractors of WWE to third parties on social media in any public forum or to any member of the media. Emphasis added. Read literally, this would prevent her from disclosing the mere fact that she worked for WWE in an interview or on her resume. Further, confidential information was not defined and thus is overbroad, particularly in light of the information that has since become public knowledge. There cannot have been a meeting of the minds on the overly broad confidentiality provision. Second, the NDA is invalid in that Ms. Grant entered into the contract under duress and undue influence as detailed herein. There was a drastic power difference and economic disparity. Ms. Grant, who never held a paying office job in her life due to caretaking for her parents, was up against McMahon and WWE, titans of the wrestling and entertainment worlds. The emotional and mental abuse and trauma endured by Ms. Grant further compounded this disparity such that Ms. Grant felt like she did not have a real say or choice in the matter. McMahon also exerted relentless pressure on Ms. Grant. As but one example, McMahon left her an extensive voice memo shortly before the NDA was signed, wherein he emphasized the public nature of the WWE and the consequences that could result if the NDA was not signed before an audit committee. Third, the NDA is a contract of adhesion. There was no meaningful choice for Ms. Grant. Proposed revisions by Ms. Grant's attorney were consistently and ultimately rejected by McMahon's attorney, and during that time, McMahon was pressuring Ms. Grant to sign the agreement. Fourth, the NDA is substantively unconscionable in that it is clearly one-sided. For example, the non-disparagement provision only applies to Ms. Grant and not McMahon or the WWE. Further, although she was slated to receive $1 million and $2 million in installments of $500,000 over the years, Ms. Grant also gave up her job at the WWE as a result of this agreement. Plaintiff's compensation is also out of line with that what similarly situated individuals have received. The agreement is even more one-sided with respect to the WWE because only McMahon is responsible for payments. The WWE's only obligations are to not sue Ms. Grant and to write a favorable letter of recommendation to a future employment upon request. Notably, however, per the terms of the NDA, the letter would come from now fired, disgraced former employee defendant Laurinaitis, who raped and sexually assaulted Ms. Grant. Fifth, the NDA is void as against public policy. The NDA purports to silence a victim of unlawful sexual abuse and prevent her from taking steps to protect other women at WWE. The policies at issue include those that were the impetus for the Speak Out Act. Under Connecticut law, courts will not blue pencil contracts where the unreasonable provision forms the heart of an agreement, such as here where the non-disclosure provision forms the heart of the contract. Thus, the entirety of the NDA must be deemed void and unenforceable, even if the confidentiality term were the only invalid term. It is not. The NDA has, in an event, been breached by McMahon and the WWE, and that Ms. Grant did not receive a second payment of $500,000 within 10 days of February 1st. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 286 as if fully stated herein. At all times relevant, McMahon was engaged in travel throughout the United States for purposes of conducting business in his position with the WWE. McMahon communicated with the plaintiff while traveling across the country and internationally to recruit, entice, obtain, provide, maintain, and or solicit plaintiff for purposes of engaging in sexual acts. He also flew others and or caused others to travel to Connecticut, including Laurinaitis and WWE superstar from out of state for the purpose of sexually exploiting Ms. Grant. At all times relevant, McMahon and Laurinaitis recruited, enticed, obtained, provided, maintained, supervised, or otherwise solicited Ms. Grant to engage in sexual conduct with the assurance that the plaintiff would be given a position at WWE, job security within the WWE, and advancement within the WWE. At all times relevant, McMahon and Laurinaitis knew that they would use fraud or coercion, as they had done to other women in the past on plaintiff for sexual encounters. McMahon and Laurinaitis offered job placement and security, as well as numerous gifts and special treatment and assurances of personal protections. McMahon's financial protection, reputational protection, and medical care, and promised these would continue if the plaintiff remained loyal and obedient by engaging in the sex acts described herein. McMahon and Laurinaitis were well aware that a job at WWE and advancement and protections outlined above were significant value to the plaintiff and used that against her. As a result, McMahon and Laurinaitis were able to force, defraud, or coerce Ms. Grant into a continued sexual activity because of promises of job placement, job security, and advancement with the WWE and personal protections outlined above. McMahon knew that the plaintiff's position would ultimately be temporary, as numerous other women would have employed by WWE only to be dismissed with the NDA's release. At all times, relevant plaintiff was subjected to coercion in that a scheme, plan, or pattern was in place that was designed to cause plaintiff to believe that failure to perform sexual acts as alleged herein would result in serious harm, included but not limited to financial harm, reputational harm, invasion of privacy, loss of control over image, losing your job with WWE, termination from subsequent employment, and or loss of career trajectory. At all times relevant, McMahon sought to exploit plaintiff's vulnerabilities in that he knew she had been through past trauma, grief, and had not been unable to find employment prior to joining WWE. At all times relevant, McMahon and Laurinaitis held positions of power over Ms. Grant, controlled her, continued employment with WWE, and pressured her to engage in sexual acts. Plaintiff incorporates 1 through 296 as if fully stated herein. WWE knowingly participated in the trafficking described above in violation of the 18 United States Constitution, 1595, by benefiting from and knowingly facilitating the venture in which McMahon traveled for WWE affairs across the United States and recruited or enticed females such as the plaintiff into coerced sexual encounters on the promise of employment with WWE, job security, and advancement. WWE knew or recklessly disregarded that it was the practice of McMahon to entice, recruit, force, and or coerce women into sexual acts based on the promise of a new life, a job, an income, job security, and an advancement within WWE, including the respect with plaintiff. Alternatively, WWE reasonably should have known of these facts under the circumstances and is subject to liability pursuant to the civil remedy provision of the TVPA. As detailed herein, WWE employees, executives, and board members were aware of McMahon's exploits involving plaintiff. Some were told, some were showing exploitative pictures, some witnessed unusual and or overtly sexual behaviors by McMahon and or Laurinaitis, and others could not help but hear what was going on through the walls at WWE's headquarters. As detailed herein, WWE had been privy to multiple allegations against McMahon involving those similar in nature as alleged herein to plaintiff's employment with WWE. Despite this knowledge, WWE continued to facilitate and or supervise McMahon's wishes and or advancing the plaintiff within the company. As detailed herein, McMahon showed numerous WWE employees sexually explicit photographs and or video of Ms. Grant, which demonstrated the knowledge of these specific employees and constructive evidence that other employees would have learned of this. Upon information and belief, other employees and benefited financially in helping to assist, support, and facilitate the commercial sex acts of McMahon, and in that WWE's culture revolved around trust relationships, increased status with McMahon, and prioritizing the protection of the company. For instance, both WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 and Corporate Officer Number 2 continue to assist in maintaining a position at WWE, as well as advancement opportunities for Ms. Grant after being told of McMahon's relations with her. Upon further information and belief, other employees were forced to resign or were let go if they knew of McMahon's exploits and failed to assist, support, and or facilitate them, such as former WWE employee, Corporate Officer Number 4. WWE benefited financially from the commercial sex act venture orchestrated by McMahon, including by having wrestling talent such as WWE signed new contracts with WWE after McMahon presented plaintiff as a sexual commodity for their use. WWE has a responsibility and duty as an employer to ensure the safety, protection, and well-being of its employees. Notwithstanding its responsibilities and duties, WWE knew or recklessly disregarded that it was the practice of McMahon and Laurinaitis to entice, recruit, force, and coerce women into sexual acts based on the promise of higher job security and advancement with WWE, including the respective plaintiff. Alternative been known of these facts under the circumstances. WWE did nothing to prevent McMahon and Laurinaitis' conduct or protect employees like Ms. Grant from it, and took no appropriate actions against the risk of harm. As a result of WWE's negligence, Ms. Grant has suffered damages in the form of the harmful or offensive contact herein described, and the same caused pain and injury to plaintiff, as well as mental and emotional trauma that is permanent in nature as described herein. Ms. Grant's injuries and damages were caused by the negligence of WWE, its employees, and agents for whose negligence WWE is liable in the following ways. WWE, by commission and omission, allowed and tolerated sexual assault and humiliation, and fostered a culture in which such acts would be tolerated. By commission and omission, retained McMahon and Laurinaitis despite actual or constructive knowledge of the propensity to entice, recruit, force, and coerce women into sexual acts based on the promise of higher job security and advancement. WWE failed to warn Ms. Grant of the risk of harm to which she was subjected while employed by WWE. WWE owed Ms. Grant a duty of care. It breached that duty, and its breach caused Ms. Grant to suffer the acts, injuries, and damages described in this complaint. The plaintiff in Corpus 1 through 32, 1 through 312. As alleged herein, plaintiff was subjected to numerous instances of civil battery after meeting McMahon, and even after the NDA was signed, included by the ways of the following examples. On July 21st, 2021, McMahon demanded that the plaintiff eat him and perform oral sex. Ms. Grant pleaded that she couldn't breathe and needed air and asked that the encounter stop. However, McMahon persisted and verbalized his roleplay fantasy while pretending to be Brock Lesnar. As Ms. Grant begged for the encounter to stop multiple times, including "Help, I'm serious and I'm scared," Mr. McMahon, among any other things, penetrated her, fisted her, pulled her hair, pinned her, shoved her, and open palm slapped her. McMahon's assault caused Ms. Grant to break down into visible weeping and curl up into a fetal position with her arms pulled up to protect her face. McMahon alternated between slaps and shoves while Ms. Grant remained motionless in the fetal position and wept, "Vince, I don't recognize you," two times. Only at that point did Vince McMahon stop. After the NDA was executed, McMahon grabbed the plaintiff's arm to turn her around when she was leaving, forced her to kneel, grabbed her head, and slammed it into his groin while saying, "Take it, bitch." In all such instances, McMahon intended to engage in the harmful and offensive contact herein described and complained of. As a direct and proximate result, Ms. Grant experienced damages in the form of the harmful or offensive contact herein described, and the same caused pain or injury to the plaintiff, as well as mental and emotional trauma that is permanent in nature as described herein. In all such instances, McMahon's conduct was malicious in nature in that he sought to degrade, humiliate, and to objectify the plaintiff for his own gratification. WWE is vicariously liable for the conduct of McMahon described above. Civil battery. As alleged herein, the plaintiff was subjected to numerous instances of civil battery. After meeting Laurinaitis on numerous occasions, he pressed her to perform oral sex for him on demand, including in his office, within company headquarters, and even in the middle of a workday while colleagues were busy at their desks. During a June 15, 2021, encounter with McMahon and Laurinaitis in the latter's office, Laurinaitis shoved his tongue in Grant's mouth after she had pleaded to stop the whole encounter, then unzipped his pants and shoved his penis into the plaintiff's mouth. In all such instances of battery perpetrated by Laurinaitis, he intended to engage in the harmful and offensive contact herein described and complained of by the plaintiff. As a direct and proximate result of the foregoing, Ms. Grant experienced damages in the form of the harmful or offensive contact herein described, and the same caused pain and injury to plaintiff, as well as permanent psychological, emotional trauma. In all such instances, Laurinaitis' conduct was malicious in that he sought to degrade, humiliate, and objectify plaintiff for his own gratification. WWE is vicariously liable for the acts of Laurinaitis. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 325 as if fully stated herein. As detailed herein, McMahon intended to inflict emotional distress, or knew or should have known that emotional distress was likely the result of his conduct. McMahon's conduct was extreme and outrageous. Examples include McMahon sexually assaulted Ms. Grant on numerous occasions. He was aggressive during sexual encounters with Ms. Grant to the point of causing her pain, including during encounters she tried to stop. McMahon objectified and trafficked Ms. Grant. He demanded that Ms. Grant engage in threesomes with other men and that she send explicit photographs for him to share with other men, despite Ms. Grant on multiple occasions explaining that she was hesitant to obeying, and all while McMahon controlled Ms. Grant's job security. McMahon regularly humiliated and degraded Ms. Grant. As one example, McMahon defecated on Ms. Grant and directed her to continue sexual performing while covered in his fecal matter. McMahon created an environment of fear and secrecy by warning Ms. Grant of the grave consequences of not being discreet about their sexual encounters, while at the same time sharing explicit photographs of her with others inside and outside of the company, and directing her to sexually service other WWE-affiliated individuals. McMahon sent perverted messages to Ms. Grant that involved the latter being subjected to sexual scenarios involving extreme pain and humiliation, including during instances when Ms. Grant clearly attempted to avoid a text message exchange that was sexually charged. McMahon would question the plaintiff, and or become cold or distant if Grant pushed back or ignored his sexually charged messages. McMahon promised other men that the plaintiff would do anything they desired, and to provide the plaintiff's personal cell phone number, without her permission, for the purpose of her performing and or providing humiliating sexual acts, such as exploitative pictures and videos, including of her urinating. McMahon ordered Ms. Grant to report all such exchanges to him. As described herein, McMahon's conduct caused plaintiff's emotional distress, included in that her distress would result from manipulative and coercive controlling conduct engaged in by McMahon. Further, the plaintiff's resulting emotional distress includes flashbacks and bouts of PTSD brought on by the conduct engaged in by McMahon. As described herein, the plaintiff's emotional distress is severe, long-lasting, and permanent in that, for example, she was needed inpatient and outpatient care following her separation from WWE, and that she continues to be impacted with the distress and resulting adverse consequences and diminished quality of life in her day-to-day life. McMahon's conduct was malicious in nature in that he sought to degrade, humiliate, and objectify the plaintiff for his own gratification throughout her employment with WWE. And WWE is vicariously liable for the conduct of McMahon described above. McMahon's conduct was malicious. Oh, wait, hold on. Plaintiff incorporates 1 through 332. As detailed herein, Laurinaitis intended to inflict emotional distress, or knew or should have known that emotional distress was likely the result of his conduct. Laurinaitis' conduct was extreme and outrageous, and examples of this include the following. Treated Ms. Grant as a sexual object over which she had been given complete control by McMahon, and forced Ms. Grant to sexually service him on demand, including in his office at the WWE headquarters. Forced Ms. Grant to walk to his hotel on certain mornings to serve herself to him as breakfast, a euphemism for sexual service. Engaged in aggressive sexual encounters with Ms. Grant and McMahon, including a sexual assault in a WWE conference room where he inserted his penis into Ms. Grant's mouth despite her protest. Despite being plaintiff's direct supervisor at WWE, Laurinaitis would almost always conduct himself in the way that was overtly sexual and objectified plaintiff, including by asking for explicit photographs and sexual encounters at WWE headquarters. As described herein, Laurinaitis' conduct was the cause of plaintiff's emotional distress, including in that her distress would result from unwanted conduct engaged in by Laurinaitis, who was also her boss. Further, the plaintiff's resulting emotional distress includes flashbacks and bouts of PTSD brought on by the conduct engaged in by Laurinaitis. As described herein, plaintiff's emotional distress is severe, long-lasting, and permanent in that, for example, she is needed inpatient and outpatient care following her separation from WWE, and that she continues to be impacted with the distress and resulting adverse consequences and diminished quality of life in her day-to-day life. WWE is vicariously liable for the acts of Laurinaitis described above. Wherefore, plaintiff respectfully requests declaratory judgment that the NDA is void and unenforceable and does not bar any of the plaintiff's claims against defendants McMahon and WWE. Judgment for compensatory damages, reasonable attorney's fees, costs, and punitive damages against the defendants pursuant to the 18 and other applicable laws, and such other and further relief as the court deems just and proper.